Number 10. Bryce Dunphy. In February 2022, 22-year-old Bryce Dunphy moved from Indianapolis to the city of Portage, Indiana, and was looking for work. Those who knew Bryce described him as a goofy, funny person who looked after his friends and family. Unfortunately, on that day, February 21st of 2020, the unthinkable happened while Bryce was out walking on the ice at West Beach in the Indiana Dunes National Park. Bryce, along with some friends, were walking across the ice when the ice gave way under his feet. Bryce, unfortunately, fell into the freezing waters below, and search and rescue teams are still desperately searching for him, although now it's search and recovery. Travis Waugh, who was with Bryce at the time, told Fox 32 Chicago, "We didn't know it was going to fall. We didn't even see the signs walking up. It was a mistake that happened, and we're heartbroken. I tried to grab him 9 or 10 times, but the waves were too strong. Every time I'd grab him, it just slammed right back into the wall. And by the time they got out here, he was already drifted away." Search and rescue teams, along with the police, were immediately dispatched to the area following the call. However, bad weather and rough conditions on the water made it almost impossible for them to look for Bryce. Recovery efforts have continued since February 21st, 2022, and now the Indiana Conservation Officers, Portage Fire Department, Porter Fire Department, Lake County Sheriff's Department, Ogden Dunes Fire Department, Indiana Dunes National Park Rangers, and the United States Coast Guard have all joined in the search for Bryce. For his family, all they want is to know what happened to their bright and happy Bryce. A GoFundMe was set up in the wake of the tragedy, and the fundraising goal was hit within a matter of days. This money will be used to help the family pay for expenses related to the search and for a funeral service in the future. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Bryce Dunphy, you're asked to contact the Indiana Department of Natural Resources at 877-463-6367. Number 9. Peter Jackson. 74-year-old Peter Jackson last made contact with his son on September 17, 2016. According to reports, Peter told his son that he was on his way to the Yosemite National Park. There are very few details available in Peter's case, but we do know from a Yosemite National Park Facebook post that Peter was in both good physical condition and was known to do moderate to strenuous hikes around 5 miles in length. His family believed that he was likely headed into Yosemite for a day hike, but the direction of where he was headed is unknown. Shortly after he vanished, his disappearance was reported to the Yosemite Park Rangers and the local police. His car was discovered at the White Wolf campsite number 58 with a ticket that was paid up until September 21st of 2016. Unfortunately, there was no sign of Peter with his car, and multiple searches by land and air have turned up nothing. That was until 2019, when his royal blue outdoor products backpack was found by fellow hikers in the Ackerson Meadow, Aspen Valley area of the Yosemite National Park. A short summary of Peter's case was posted to the r/missing411 subreddit, and a user by the name of Velociraptor commented the following: "White Wolf is on top of the Tuolumne River, the top of a deep canyon. There's only one way down to the valley floor, or if you stay on the ridge, you could end up falling down the side and probably get stuck halfway down. It's not a sheer cliff, it is at some points, but for the most part, a person would have to have climbing ropes to scale down either way. This area is outside the normal/regular campsites and more for the introverted or leave-me-alone camper. By the way, as an experienced hiker, this is not a place to go hiking by yourself," he continues. "Even if he slid down the slope and twisted his ankle, that would be it." Aside from the discovery of his backpack, there have been no further developments in the search for Peter. Peter Jackson last made contact with his family on September 17, 2016, and told them that he was headed to the Yosemite National Park. Peter is described as a white male, 5 foot 10 inches tall, 155 pounds, with blue eyes and gray hair. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the National Park Service tip line at 888-653-0009 or the Yosemite Dispatch at 209-379-1926 or 209-379-1992. Number 8. Walter H. Reinhardt. 66-year-old Walter Reinhardt mysteriously vanished from the Yosemite National Park on September 19, 2002, and hasn't been seen or heard from since. Walter had served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam and also worked as a sheriff's deputy in Virginia following his military service. Everyone who knew him said that he was very physically fit and was very capable in the great outdoors, making his disappearance all the more strange. His family noticed that it was very out of character for him to leave without making contact, so when he walked into the Yosemite National Park and never walked out again, they knew that something was terribly wrong. Walter's car was later found, with some reports stating it was discovered on September 30, 2002, while other reports stated October 2, 2002, at the White Wolf Trailhead. Authorities believe that that is where Walter was heading. In an article for the LA Times, it was disclosed that Walter had left his Swiss Army knife in his car. This article also details how Walter's credit card was last used on September 19, 2002, to purchase gas from a gas station just 15 miles from the White Wolf Trailhead. The last confirmed sighting of Walter is believed to have been at around 9 a.m. on September 19, 2002, by a park employee closing down a lodge in the White Wolf area of the park. According to the LA Times, he remembered a fellow with a German alpine hat asking directions that morning to a lake a few miles up the trail. Since then, there's been no sign of Walter Reinhardt, and multiple search efforts have turned up nothing. His family told investigators that Walter was extremely tough and was more than capable of making it in the rough terrain, even if he did like to hike alone. Authorities do not believe that Walter is a victim of foul play, and suspect that he either got lost or was injured during his hike. His sons say that he is in very good physical condition and has no medical conditions and doesn't take any medications. Walter is described as a white male with graying-brown hair, 5 foot 8 inches tall and 145 pounds. He was possibly last seen wearing a gray felt alpine hat, leather hiking boots, and carrying a large fanny pack. Anyone with any information as to his whereabouts is asked to please contact the National Park Service at 888-653-0009 or the Yosemite National Park Communications Center at 209-379-1992. Number 7. Ruth Ann Rupert. When 49-year-old Ruth Ann Rupert attended the Yosemite Medical Clinic in Curry Village on August 14, 2000, no one had any idea that it would be the last time she would ever be seen alive. According to reports, Ruth Ann had planned to go on a hike with a backpacking group. However, due to her medical incident, she was forced to postpone and seek treatment. After receiving the undisclosed treatment, it appears that Ruth Ann set off on a day hike from Yosemite Falls to the Foresta area of the park. Her NamUs profile states, on August 14, she had stated that she planned to hike in to catch up to a backcountry hiking group, which had left that morning, but would turn around and exit the backcountry if she could not catch up to them by 4 p.m. The medical staff would be the last people to see Ruth Ann alive, and after she failed to make it out of the park rangers and surrounding police forces were made aware of her disappearance. Ruth Ann's disappearance is particularly strange due to the lack of details that are available, and it appears as if she walked into the Yosemite National Park and simply disappeared into thin air. Search and rescue crews have attempted to locate Ruth Ann, but so far the search has been fruitless. The only clue in Ruth Ann's case came in 2008 when her backpack was found in the Fireplace Creek drainage. This creek is along the route that Ruth Ann would have taken to get to Foresta. However, nothing else has ever been found. Ruth Ann Rupert is described as a white female with brown hair and brown eyes, standing 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighing about 140 pounds. Ruth Ann has a prosthetic left eye and was believed to have been hiking from Yosemite Falls to Foresta on August 14, 2000. Anyone with information is asked to please contact the National Park Service at 888-653-0009. Number 6. Thelma Pauline Melton. The disappearance of Thelma Pauline Melton has continued to baffle investigators and online sleuths alike for many years. On September 25, 1981, Thelma, who was known to her friends as Polly, set off on a hike in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park with two of her female friends named Red and Trula. While Thelma lived in Jacksonville, Florida for most of the year with her husband Bob, the two also owned a trailer in the Deep Creek campground in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where they would stay for a few months of the year. These few months seemed to be Thelma's favorite, and she enjoyed bringing friends down and going for hikes on the easy trails, with the Deep Creek Canyon being her favorite. On September 25, 1981, Thelma and her friends set off down the trail at around 3 p.m., while Bob and the others stayed at the trailer. The trail was a nice, leisurely walk for the three companions, and they took it slow, as Thelma was known to be a slow walker. But about an hour into the walk, something changed. Thelma suddenly began to speed up and was quickly out of their sight. The path that Thelma had taken eventually led back to the campsite where her trailer was, so her friends just assumed that they would catch up with her there. However, when the two arrived at the trailer, Thelma was nowhere to be seen. Bob confirmed that Thelma hadn't made it back, and after searching the trailer and the trail that they had just walked, they called the police to report her missing. Thelma suffered from a range of medical conditions, and she did not like to hike alone, so her sudden disappearance worried her friends and husband. Park rangers and the police arrived at the trailer and began the search for Thelma, but as they made their way through the Deep Creek Trail, there was no sign of her. The tread on one of Thelma's shoes was very distinctive, and while park rangers were able to follow her movements for a short while, her tracks quickly became distorted and hidden amongst the foot traffic of other hikers. Bob and Thelma's friends scratched their heads, wondering why Thelma would all of a sudden take off after she had been taking the trail at a leisurely pace. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Thelma had been acting strangely in the days before her sudden disappearance. According to some sources, Thelma had not turned up at the center where she volunteered on September 25, 1981. She was a regular visitor to this center that provided hot meals to the elderly, and those at the center noted that it was very strange for Thelma not to show up. Investigators also discovered another clue when talking to the supervisor at the center where she volunteered. The supervisor revealed that on September 24th, Thelma had made a phone call to an unidentified person, and that there were rumors that she might be having an affair. These rumors had never been substantiated, but some people theorized that the phone call placed by Thelma on the day before she disappeared has something to do with her disappearance. Did Thelma contact the man that she'd been having an affair with and come up with an elaborate plan to run away and start a new life? Now, there's been no evidence to back this theory up, but it is a very popular theory in Thelma's case. Wide-scale searches of the area have been conducted over the years, but no sign of Thelma has ever been found, and her case remains cold. Thelma Pauline Melton was last seen on September 25, 1981, on the Deep Creek Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. She is described as a white female with auburn hair, brown eyes, standing 5'11" and weighing about 170 pounds. Thelma suffers from high blood pressure and nausea and requires medication for these conditions. She is also known to smoke 2 packs of Virginia Slims a day. She was last seen wearing a pink and white striped sleeveless blouse, tan pants, a diamond-studded white gold wristwatch, a wedding band, size 8.5 tan low-cut shoes with crepe soles, and the sole of her left shoe had a crack across the ball of the foot, giving her prints a distinctive marking. Anyone with any information on Thelma is asked to contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation at 615-744-4000 or the National Park Service on 888-653-0009. Number 5. Joe Halpern. 22-year-old Joe Halpern was an accomplished and talented young man and was enrolled as a graduate student of astronomy at the University of Chicago in 1933. While not studying hard for his degree, Joe could not be found at the observatory where he worked in Wisconsin, and he also enjoyed math, chemistry, and chess. The world was truly his oyster, and for Joe, his life was just beginning. However, one hike would change all that, and 89 years later, his family are still searching for him. On August 15th, 1933, Joe set off to begin his hike in the Rocky Mountains National Park near Taylor Peak. Joe and his friend, Joseph Garrick, had been camping in the park, and Joe was keen to get going on the hike near Taylor Peak. Joseph decided to stay at the campsite, leaving Joe to hike alone. The two said their goodbyes, not knowing it would be the last time that they would ever see each other. As the day passed and Joe still hadn't returned to the campsite, Joseph became more and more concerned for his friend's welfare. And by the end of the day, he reported him missing to the park rangers and local police department. Park rangers and the police began their search for Joe, but a large snowstorm hindered their efforts, and as the snow fell on the Rocky Mountains, the concern for Joe's welfare grew. Despite a number of searches, nothing was ever found of Joe, and the authorities determined that he had likely perished due to exposure. Joe's family have not given up looking for their loved one, and while now in 2022, authorities are not actively looking for him, a familial DNA sample has been obtained to aid in his identification should his remains be found. Following his disappearance, investigators began to receive several possible sightings of Joe in such faraway places as Phoenix, Arizona, Alliance, Nebraska, and Detroit, Michigan. None of these sightings have ever been confirmed, and it's likely they were just a case of mistaken identity. Joe Halpern was last seen on August 15, 1933, and while almost 90 years has elapsed since his disappearance, his friends and family are determined to find the truth. Joe is described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, 5 foot 8 inches tall, 165 pounds. His right eye is crossed, and there's also a scar above that eye. The Charlie Project notes that Joe may have used the alias Louis Hollenbuck, and that he was also fluent in French and German. He was last seen wearing a light blue or white shirt with blue stripes, light brown pants, and heavy shoes. He was also carrying an army knapsack. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Colorado Bureau of Investigation at 303-239-5764 or the Glendale Police Department at 303-759-1511. Number 4. Stacy Arras. 14-year-old Stacy Ann Arras mysteriously vanished from the Yosemite National Park in July 1981 when she was visiting with her father and 6 others. On July 27, 1981, the group comprised of Stacy, her father, and 6 others rode in on horseback to the cabins at the Sunrise High Sierra Camp in the park. The views were spectacular, and everyone took a moment to take in the beauty around them before getting off their horses and heading to the cabins to freshen up. But Stacy didn't want to rest, however. Instead, she wanted to hike down to the lake armed with her camera to take some photos. Stacy asked her father to come with her, but he declined. According to newspaper reports and information released in a FOIA from the National Park Service, a 77-year-old man who was part of the group that Stacy and her father was traveling with offered to accompany her down the short trail. Those at the cabins watched as Stacy and the man walked down the hill and onto the trail toward the lake. Just short of the lake, the man stopped to take a rest, but Stacy carried on, determined to get pictures of the water. That was when Stacy disappeared behind some trees on her way to the lake. She was out of sight of everyone, and when 10 or so minutes had passed and she hadn't returned, they all rushed to look for her. The trail was only 1.5 miles long, and Stacy had been accompanied by an adult, so how could she have disappeared in such a short space of time? The Yosemite Park Rangers were alerted to Stacy's disappearance, and they quickly sprang into action, calling in the help of helicopters and search dogs, along with dozens of concerned volunteers who were at the camp. People searched tirelessly throughout the night and into the next day, with concerned volunteers putting their plans on hold to help Stacy's father look for her. The search and rescue effort was large, but unfortunately, Stacy has never been located. The only clue left behind was her camera lens cap that was found in the trees where she was last seen on the trail. Yosemite Park officials remember Stacy's case, and to those who are involved in the search efforts, they hope that one day her family will have closure. Stacy mysteriously disappeared while hiking to take pictures near the Sunrise High Sierra Camp on July 27, 1981. She is described as a white female with blonde hair, blue eyes, 5 foot 5 inches tall, and 120 pounds. Stacy wore narrow upper and lower dental retainers and also smoked cigarettes. She was last seen wearing an off-white hooded pullover windbreaker with a horizontal zipper front pouch above the breastline, a tight-fitting white jersey blouse with a square necklace edged with a 1/4-inch white lace, and pull-on shorts with vertical sky blue and maroon pinstripes. She was also wearing size 8.5 or size 9 gray hiking boots with rubber Vibram soles, a gold double-wrapped ankle bracelet, and possibly small studded earrings. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the National Park Service at 888-653-0009. Number 3, Samuel Bulkey. 8-year-old Sammy Bulkey and his father, Kenneth, decided to enter the Crater Lake National Park together for a hike. Sammy was autistic and had aversions to bright lights and loud noises, and found that the great outdoors was the perfect place to relax and explore nature in peace. According to reports, Sammy was just like any other boy his age, enjoyed fishing and playing with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. On October 14, 2006, Sammy and Kenneth arrived at a pullout just short of the Cleetwood Cove parking lot in the Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. Kenneth had agreed to play hide-and-seek with Sammy, and this area was the perfect spot. The two ran around, tagging each other and hiding, but then Sammy got distracted by something in the distance on a cinder slope. Sammy had spotted and ran over to what he thought might have been gold, and excitedly ran over and started exploring the area. Meanwhile, Kenneth walked back to the car and instructed Sammy to come back so that the two could go to their cabin for the night as the sun was slowly starting to set. But Sammy refused, and he stood on the cinder slope looking down at his father. Kenneth tried to coax him down, but then quickly realized that Sammy might be wanting him to carry on the game of hide-and-seek from earlier. So, Kenneth rushed up the cinder slope and began running after Sammy. No matter how fast he ran, Sammy remained just ahead of him, and when he reached the top, he found that Sammy had disappeared. He called out for his son, but there was no sign of him. He called out for his son, but there was no answer and no sign of him. Sammy had run over the top and disappeared into the wilderness. Panicked, Kenneth alerted the authorities, and soon a large-scale search and rescue effort was underway. Volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, police, and park rangers all joined in the search for Sammy, but despite over 4,000 acres being combed, no sign of the little boy was ever found. Heat cameras are deployed in helicopters, but still no sign of Sammy. The search for Sammy has continued since 2006, and while his family held a memorial service for him, they're still fighting for answers. Sammy Bulkey was last seen in the Crater Lake National Park on October 14, 2006. He is described as a white male with light brown hair, brown eyes. At the time of his disappearance was 4 foot 8 inches tall and weighed 85 pounds. Sammy had a mole under his right ear and a mole on the left side of his throat. He was last seen wearing a long-sleeved black and green striped shirt, cargo pants, red suede slip-on shoes with rubber soles, and a blue winter coat. Sammy has autism and is frightened by bright lights and loud noises. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Klamath County Sheriff's Office at 541-883-7479 or the National Park Service at 888-653-0009. Number 2, Bruce Pike. 47-year-old Bruce Pike of Wyoming was last seen in the Yellowstone National Park on August 2, 2006. There are very few details about Bruce's disappearance, and all we know is that he was last seen at a campground on Indian Creek in the park and has never been seen or heard from again. His car was later found abandoned in the park, but specific details of where and the condition of the car have never been released. Bruce Pike is described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'11" and 185 pounds. There are no details about the clothing he was possibly wearing when he disappeared, and there are incredibly few details about Bruce as a person. The Charlie Project notes that Texas authorities are involved in the investigation, but again, further information in regards to this has not been released. Anyone with information about Bruce Pike's whereabouts is asked to please contact the National Park Service at 888-653-0009 or the Texas Department of Public Safety at 800-346-3234. And number 1, Dikran Nadjian. Armenian Brit Dikran Nadjian was taking a well-earned holiday to the United States in July of 1972. Dikran was a medical student at the esteemed Cambridge University, and after the stress of studying and exams, he needed a holiday to help him blow off some steam. So, he packed his bags and headed for the United States to explore what the U.S. had to offer. He planned to travel to several places in the U.S., including Florida, but Florida would have to wait until he had finished his trip to the infamous Yosemite National Park in California. On July 24th, 1972, Dick Wren entered the Yosemite National Park, taking in its beauty and getting ready to brag about the sights to his friend back home in England. Unfortunately, this trip to Yosemite would be his last, and after asking an attendant how to get to Half Dome, Dick Wren has never been seen or heard from again. There are few details in the case, and the authorities presume that he either got lost or became injured during his hike. After Dick Wren was reported missing, search and rescue crews scoured the area but found no sign of the Armenian Brit. There have been no personal belongings and no clues found to help investigators figure out what happened to Dick Wren, and his case has since gone cold. Dick Wren Najian, also known as Dick to his friends, is described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'6" to 5'11", and 150 to 182 pounds. He has a dark mole on the back of his right hand and speaks with a very thick British accent, although the specific accent isn't listed, as the UK has many distinctive accents. He was last seen wearing a red, white, and blue short-sleeve polo shirt with the word VOTE on it, light blue bell-bottoms, desert boots with beige canvas tops, a black belt, an orange Omega Seamaster watch, and large mod-style sunglasses. Dick Wren was also carrying his 35mm Pentax camera with a zoom lens and a strap. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Yosemite National Park Service at 209-379-1992. Number 10. Jeannie Hesselschwart. Jeannie Hesselschwart was a 37-year-old social worker from Arlington, Massachusetts, who had dedicated much of her life to helping others. In July 1995, she and her boyfriend, Mike Monahan, decided to take a well-earned break, which saw them heading to the Yosemite National Park. Unfortunately, this trip would quickly turn into a living nightmare for Mike and Jeannie's family, and while her body was eventually found, they still did not have all the answers in the case. On July 9, 1995, well, folks, there you have it. Hopped into their car and headed to the Yosemite National Park. Unsolved. Driving down highways and turning through intersections and rugged roads finally led them to Glacier Point, which is close to Summit Meadow. With the sun shining and plenty of nature to explore, Mike and Jeannie went their separate ways, walking off in different directions to take a look at whatever they wanted. This arrangement suited the couple, and they had agreed to meet back at their car once they were finished. The walks were only meant to be short, with Mike picking up his binoculars while Jenny set off in a separate direction. Around 15 minutes had passed, and Mike decided that it was time to get back into their car to carry on their journey. As he neared the car, he saw that Jenny wasn't there. He waited at the car, thinking that Jenny would appear at any moment from her short walk, but as minutes turned into hours, there was no sign of Jenny, and Mike knew that something was amiss. Panicked, but not yet wanting to alert authorities, Mike searched the area himself, pulling in the help of other hikers and asking those in the area if they had seen his girlfriend. Unfortunately, no one had, and 2 hours later, Mike approached the Yosemite Park Rangers and alerted them of Jenny's disappearance. This report was taken seriously, and within hours of the report being made, helicopters had descended from the skies and sniffer dogs and their handlers were carefully combing through the park. Mike watched on as search crews and volunteers looked for his girlfriend. By all accounts, the two had shared a happy relationship and had lived in Arlington for several years. Jenny also had a good relationship with her roommate, Vicky Fortino. Her disappearance came as a massive shock to Mike, and the next clue in Jenny's case would only further traumatize him. As mentioned, sniffer dogs were brought in to help track Jenny's scent, and these dogs hit on Jenny's scent almost immediately and circled back around to the road where her car had been parked. The dog handlers had a bizarre reaction to this discovery. Instead of theorizing that perhaps her scent was not strong enough or that other factors were at play, they jumped straight to the idea of foul play. Moreover, they began to point the finger at Mike in the initial hours of the investigation, even though there was no solid evidence whatsoever to prove or disprove this theory. Why the dog handlers jumped immediately to the conclusion of murder is something that we'll never know, but this idea that Mike or another person possibly was somehow involved in Jenny's disappearance has persisted to this day, especially social media sites, internet forums, and other places where armchair web sleuths like to congregate. With the idea and instance from some that foul play was involved in Jenny's disappearance, The park rangers wasted no time in calling the FBI to join the investigation. While park rangers and FBI agents were processing the details, teams on the ground and in the air continued to look for Jenny, and in fact, this search turned into the largest search in Yosemite's history. Search and rescue teams, tracker dogs, volunteers, park rangers, police, FBI, and even paratroop jumpers were all brought in on the search, and despite hundreds of pairs of eyes surveying the land, no sign of Jenny was found in the park. Mike was thoroughly interviewed by the FBI, as were Jeannie's known associates and friends. The FBI was quickly able to rule out Mike after he passed a polygraph test. As we know, however, though, polygraph tests are not an exact science nor an accurate measure of someone's guilt, and are not even admissible in some courts across the world for various reasons. So, for 2 weeks, the FBI and other agencies scoured the area in which Jeannie was last seen, and all they found were 2 footprints that were believed to have been made by Jeannie's boots. One footprint was near the car, and the other, interestingly, was on the trail of Bridalveil to Yosemite Valley, which is a very popular and well-traveled trail. So, if Jenny had headed down this popular trail, then what happened to her? At the 2-week mark, the search was officially called off as the FBI and other agencies failed to find any other evidence that could lead them in the right direction. Jeannie's friends and family were dismayed when the search was called off, but her roommate, Vicky, was determined to keep the search effort alive for her friend. In a brave move, Vicky started her own unofficial search, calling in the help of her friend, Maureen McConnell, and the two set about searching for resources and centers that could help them. They settled on the tracking school run by Tom Brown Jr., and after conversations over the phone, Tom turned the case over to a student of his in California who agreed to help Vicky and Maureen. Tom returned to the area that had once been abuzz with FBI activity and decided to take a different path. In an article for WildwoodTracking.com, they described the route and methodology that the trackers used to find Jenny. The article states, "The student called a fellow tracker student who lived near to Yosemite. The student checked out the place where the young woman had disappeared. He found no signs of Jenny, but he did notice that the area consisted of stands of aspen trees. It occurred to him that when the wind blew through the leaves, the resulting noise closely resembled that of a car driving on a paved road. Unfortunately, if one were to search for a road by walking toward the noise, one would be walking away from the true road." The tracker students also studied maps of the area and determined that Jenny would have likely walked somewhere to the right, as right-hand dominance apparently plays a larger role in our decision-making when walking. Despite detailed graphs, maps, and plans being written up and debated, no sign of Jenny was found. The tracking school and those associated agreed that Jenny perhaps went into shock when she noticed she was lost, which would have thrown all rational thoughts out the window. Unofficial searches for Jenny continued, with Vicky and Maureen ever grateful to the efforts of the tracking school and those involved. Trackers continued to scour through different maps and plans of the area, hoping that something would jump out of the page at them. And something did. Using data and techniques learned at the school, they were able to pinpoint a rough and rugged area in the park and even gave investigators the coordinates. However, the investigators were not interested in the least with what these tracking students had to say and quickly dismissed their ideas. Then, on September 3rd, 1995, 2 months after she vanished, Jenny's remains were found by 2 fishermen in a small body of water. The area in which Jenny was eventually found is 3/4 of a mile above Bridalveil Falls and around 3 miles from where Jenny was last seen. The fishermen who found Jenny later told investigators the area is accessible to anyone other than rock and mountain climbers. It's really rugged. So, this begs the question, how did Jenny end up there, and what had happened to her? Due to the advanced level of decomposition, Jenny was identified via dental records, and unfortunately, the coroner was never able to determine a cause of death, although many believe she may have drowned. It would later transpire that the area the students had pinpointed was indeed the area in which Jenny was found. But now that she had been found, the discovery of her remains left investigators with even more questions. Investigators don't believe that Jenny was carried to the area, but they are unable to provide any other theories as to what may have happened to her. Perhaps Jenny went into shock and tried to cross onto a trail in that rugged area, or did something more sinister happen to her? For almost 27 years now, Jenny's case has remained unsolved, and it's high time that her friends and family get the answers and justice they deserve. If you have any information about Jenny or her disappearance, you're asked to contact the FBI's San Francisco field office at 415-553-7400. Number 9, Carol Turner. 32-year-old Carol Turner was a postgraduate student at the University of New Mexico and loved nothing more than exploring the great outdoors. When she wasn't studying hard for her degree, Carol would often wander into national parks and open areas to get a look at the plants and wildlife around her. Unfortunately, the trip she made to the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in January of 1971 would be her last. And ever since then, her disappearance has remained a mystery. On January 31st, 1971, Carol drove to the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in Arizona. Carol had a keen interest in plants and flowers, and the monument was the perfect place for Carol, as it is home to many species of wild plants and is the only place in the U.S. where the organ pipe cacti grow. As February crept in, Carol was still in the park, and the last confirmed sighting of her came on February 2, 1971. Park ranger recalls speaking to Carol as she had asked them for hiking suggestions and also told them that she was staying in the main visitor campground of the park. Sadly, there's very little information available about Carol's disappearance, and all we do know is that sometime on February 1st or 2nd, Carol hiked up to Bull Pasture in the Ajo Mountains, and that she made that trip again on February 3rd. Unfortunately, Carol never returned from what should have been a day hike, and her absence was noticed immediately. Her car was still parked in the Bull Pasture Trailhead parking lot, and the only thing missing were her boots and canteen. Park rangers immediately recognized the car and its owner. After all, she had spoken to them just a day earlier, asking them for hiking recommendations. Tucked neatly under the windshield wiper of the car was a handwritten note from Carol, giving the park rangers very specific instructions. This note, in context with Carol's disappearance, is certainly chilling and makes you wonder whether Carol maybe had a premonition of what was going to happen to her. The note read to the effect, "If my car is still here by February 4th, call park rangers. I am a solo hiker." With her sudden disappearance and this ominous note, park rangers wasted no time in reporting Carol missing, and soon, authorities had descended on the area. A wide-scale search was carried out for Carol, but no sign of her has ever been found. Over 3,600 hours were put into the investigation, but it remained fruitless. Volunteers, search and rescue personnel, sheriffs, investigators, and other experts, totaling 64 people, all joined in the search for Carol, but were unable to locate any clues. Carlton Oglesby, the sheriff's lieutenant at the time, told the Ajo Copper News on February 11, 1971, "Everybody, the monument people, our people, Border Patrol, the Cells Law and Order, has worn themselves out looking for this woman. They're all experienced, and they've gone over the whole place with a fine-tooth comb. None of them see how she could have been missed if she's in there." While Carol has not been found, investigators did discover some baffling entries on the trail registers across the park. At the trail log for Bull Pasture, Carol had cryptically written, "Hi, if you have binocs," meaning binoculars, "look for a white shirt or yellow windbreaker across the way and say hello." The other entry read, "I brought the beer. Where were you?" This now begs the question, who was Carol waiting for? Who had she brought the beers for? And why were they meeting on the Bull Pasture Trail? 2022 marks the 51st anniversary of Carol's disappearance, and we are sadly no closer now than we were in 1971 in solving this mystery. In fact, there's an underwhelming lack of information in Carol's case, and she's not been listed with NamUs or other authorities. Anyone with any information, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, is asked to contact the Organ Pipe Cactus National Park Rangers at 520-387-6849. Number 8, David Barclay Miller. From an early age, David Barclay Miller was a force to be reckoned with. The Washington Post article states, David Miller's parents no more could have kept him out of the wilderness than a fish could be kept out of water or a bird from flight. It's clear that David loved the great outdoors, and this love affair of his with nature would ultimately cost him his life. After graduating from college with a degree in religious studies, David decided that his job needed to be an adventurous one. He wasn't the kind of person to sit behind a desk all day. He wanted to get out into the world and experience as much of it as possible. When the phone rang in early 1998, David was over the moon to hear that it was the Sedona U.S. Forest Service offering him a job as a park ranger in the Coconino National Forest. David took the job and was incredibly eager to get started. His family was incredibly proud of him, and it was clear that he had a long and happy career ahead of him. Unfortunately, the promise of a bright future would come to an end on May 19, 1998. On that day, David told his colleagues that he was going for a 2.5-day hike in the Red Rock Secret Mountain Wilderness area in the Coconino National Forest where he worked. David was considered a very experienced hiker, and there were no concerns for his safety as he knew the park well. On that same day, his fellow park rangers saw David at the Beaver Creek Ranger Station, but this was the last time that David Miller was ever seen or heard from. When he failed to return from his trip and returned to work, his colleagues raised the alarm and the search began. The search intensified after David's car was discovered abandoned at the Vultee Arch Trail, but no sign of him has ever been found. As said previously, David was extremely experienced in the wilderness, and authorities believe that he most likely got injured or fell during his hike. With the anniversary of his disappearance fast approaching, his family and friends hope that 2022 will be the year that they finally receive answers. David Barclay Miller is described as a white male with sandy blonde hair, blue-gray eyes, stands at 5'11" tall and weighs 160 pounds. He was last seen wearing a t-shirt, shorts, black hiking boots, and was carrying a forest green Gregory backpack. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office at 928-771-3260 and reference case number 98-14554. Number 7. Michael Bryson. 27-year-old Michael Bryson was the love of his parents' lives. He was a constant source of joy and happiness for those around him, and despite having his own issues with substance abuse, Michael wanted to help everyone. Anna Brandt, one of Michael's friends, told the Spokesman newspaper he was really a good guy. He would give the shirt off his back to a stranger, and he had the most infectious smile and laugh that would light up any room he walked into. He was vulnerable, but in the best way. He opened up to people in a way that made them comfortable to be their true selves around him. In August 2020, Michael was starting to turn his life around. He had struggled with substance abuse and addiction, but was making conscious efforts to get his life back on the right track. August 3rd, some sources state the 4th, 2020 would be the last time that Michael's parents, Parrish and Tina, would ever see their son alive. According to reports, Michael stopped by their house in Harrisburg, Oregon to see them, and all appeared well. During this meeting, Michael told his parents that he was on his way to Hobo Campground in the Umpqua National Forest and that he would be gone for around a week. Tina, Parrish, and other friends would later tell investigators that Michael and a group of friends were heading to Hobo Camp for a birthday celebration/camping trip. Those at the event, however, described it later as more of a rave, and that on the night of August 4th, 2020, between 40 and 60 people were in attendance. The party kicked off on the night of the 4th, with friends gathering around and enjoying themselves. The party continued well into the morning of August 5th, and at around 4:30 a.m., witnesses recall seeing Michael get out of a party bus and walk away from the camp. This is the last confirmed sighting of Michael, and since then, he's not been seen or heard from. His father, Parrish, told NBC News, "We know he was up there Monday and Tuesday, and that the DJ at this party, that was actually a rave, invited him up on stage to do a set, but by the next morning, he was gone." As his friends awoke the next morning, no doubt with pounding heads and hazy memories from the night before, they noticed that Michael was missing. All his camping equipment had been left in his friend's car, and his phone had been turned off ever since they entered the Hobo Campground. According to his mother, Tina, who was only alerted to her son's disappearance on August 6, 2020, by the time we found out, it was almost 12 hours since he'd been missing. The moment I put my foot out of the car, I knew Michael was gone. People weren't looking for Michael. They were sitting around, drinking, eating, laughing. Nobody was out searching for him, so I felt in my gut something had happened. Michael's father, Parrish, also added, "There's been a lot of conflicting stories from the beginning. One story is that he walked away from the camp. The other story is that a group of individuals picked him up on the road. It appears that those at Hobo Campground with Michael dragged their heels in reporting him missing, and valuable time was lost on his case. When the alarm was finally raised, the Lane County Sheriff's Office, along with horseback riders, search and rescue teams, boots on the ground, and drones, all set about searching for Michael. Unfortunately, after almost 19 days, the search was called off as no trace of Michael was found. To their credit, some of Michael's friends and even strangers who had attended the party stayed behind to help his family search for him. His family believed that those who attended the party hold the key to what happened to Michael that night, and it will take the right person to talk for answers and justice to be served. While investigators called off official searches, his family and friends continued to search Hobo Campground multiple times a week for him. Facebook pages, groups, posters, and flyers were created and circulated in the area. Michael's family fought to keep his name in the media spotlight, hoping that his picture might jog someone's memory. His family continued and continues to this day to advocate for Michael as at the forefront of the search for him. The Facebook group, Let's Find Michael Bryson, has over 22,000 members who are dedicated to helping the family look for him. The group is littered with posts from friends, family, and strangers who are all pooling their tips and information together in a safe haven. The fight to keep Michael's case in the media paid off when, in December 2020, 5 months after he disappeared, a new tip came into investigators. According to the spokesman, the Lane County Sheriff's Office received a tip that led them to Bryce Creek Road, just a short distance from the Hobo Campground area. During a search of this area, the Sheriff's Office discovered items of Michael's clothing that he had been wearing on the night he disappeared. Parrish later told KPIC News, "The blue ribbon is right there where two of the items were found, and the blue and orange ribbon is where the other items were found. I'm 99% sure these items were planted." He also added, "We have a really good idea of what's happened, some idea as to who's involved, and we're just waiting on that last tip to open everything up. We just want the truth. We want Michael back." 2022 will mark 2 years since Michael mysteriously vanished from the Hobo Camp in the Umpqua National Forest. But his family have not given up on their search for him. His parents regularly drive down the roads and through the area where he was last seen. They continue to update the Facebook group, have also created the Michael Bryson Foundation, which aims to address the needs of any family searching for a missing loved one. Michael Bryson is described as a white male with brown hair, blue eyes, although other agencies report green or hazel. He stands 6 foot tall and weighs 150 pounds. Michael has facial hair, a nose ring, and several tattoos. Tattoos include hands shaking in the shape of a heart with "Stay Strong, My Brothers" in cursive writing on his ribcage, a geometric-shaped bear on the back of his arm, an elephant on his right leg, a tree in a diamond shape on the lower left front leg, and a lion face on his left leg. He was last seen wearing a white t-shirt, tan short, and white Crocs with rainbows on them. NBC News also added that he may be wearing a brown corduroy baseball cap. Currently, there's a $10,000 reward in this case, and anyone with any information is asked to contact the Lane County Sheriff's Office at 541-682-4150 and reference case 20-5286. Number 6. Fern Baird. 63-year-old Fern Baird was a successful and well-accomplished woman living in Park City, Utah. Fern had made a comfortable life for herself, working as a realtor and owning her own yoga bag business. Her cousin described her as an outdoorsy woman who loved to ski and took life at a slower pace sometimes. On October 19, 2020, Fern made a trip to the Sawtooth National Forest in Idaho and set out for what should have been a simple day hike. However, Fern failed to return home, and since October 19, 2020, there's been no sign of Fern and she remains missing. At around 1 p.m. on October 19, 2020, Fern signed into the Prairie Creek Trailhead in the Prairie Peak area of the Sawtooth National Forest. Fern would never sign out, and what happened to her is a mystery. Upon checking the trail logs, investigators discovered that a group of 5 hikers also entered the trail around the same time as Fern but they have never been able to track these people down. In her entry, Fern wrote, "To the lake and back," and the Charlie Project reports that the Prairie Creek Trail is a 10-mile loop along the west side of Highway 75 within the boundaries of the national park. Nobody noticed that Fern was missing or potentially in danger until October 22nd of 2020, when the hotel she'd been staying at alerted the authorities. Fern had not checked out of her room, and she had not been seen since she left for a hike on October 19th. The Blaine County Sheriff's Office and the Blaine County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team responded to the incident and began their search for Fern. As the investigation continued, the Idaho Mountain Search and Rescue, National Guard helicopters, drones, ATVs, horse riders, and 3 dog units were also brought in to help with the search. Ultimately, nothing would be found, and days after she'd been reported missing, the search was officially called off. There's only been one clue in Fern's disappearance, and that was the discovery of her 2018 Subaru Crosstrek in the Prairie Creek parking area. Apart from that, there's been no credit card activity, no phone activity, and no clue to suggest where she may have headed or where she ended up. Possible that Fern had either hiked to the Prairie Lakes, Minor Lakes, Norton Lakes, or Mill Lake, and all these areas have been searched extensively. In a press conference shortly after Fern's disappearance, Blaine County Sheriff Steve Harkins said, "We're interested in speaking with an unknown Boise couple, and also a party of 5 hikers from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that both hiked either the West Fork drainage of Prairie Creek or to Prairie Lake on October 19th. These individuals may have information, or maybe they saw Baird hiking that day." 2 years later, and the Blaine County Sheriff's Office are still searching for the individuals mentioned in their initial press release. The prevailing theory is that Fern got injured and perished while out in the wilderness. Chief Deputy William Fruehling of the Blaine County Sheriff's Office told the Inquisitor, "The most likely theory is that she became lost, perhaps left the trail and had to spend the night. She may have taken shelter and passed away from exposure. There's nothing that points to foul play, but there's nothing that points to anything concrete either." Fern Baird remains missing and her case remains unsolved. Her friends and family have never given up looking for her and have posted a $25,000 reward for information that leads to her whereabouts. Fern is described as a white female with brown, graying hair, brown eyes. She stands 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighs 115 pounds. Fern was last seen wearing a light gray jacket, dark pants, gray gloves, a dark mask, and a dark fanny pack. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact Lieutenant Micah Bade of the Blaine County Sheriff's Office at 208-788-5555 and reference case BCS 2010-006. Number 5, Lucas Renault. On June 18, 2018, 20-year-old Lucas Renault called his mother, Magali, wishing her a happy birthday. Magali now cherishes this call, as this is the last time she ever spoke to her son. According to Le Parisien, Lucas, a student at the Chateauneuf-Polo Park, along with 10 other people, planned to hike to the Harrison Waterfalls close to the border of France and Switzerland. This is an extremely popular destination, and from reports, it appears that hundreds of people make the trip to the waterfalls each year. As the group began to walk down the steps to the waterfall, a friend snapped a quick photo of Lucas, holding the dog of one of the hikers in his arms. This would be the last photo ever taken of Lucas, and just hours later, their trip would descend into panic and chaos. Lucas never returned from his walk to the waterfall, and his absence was noted immediately by his friends. It appears that the group had become separated during the walk, but the full details of this have never been disclosed. Aside from the call to his mother, Lucas made one other call on the day of his disappearance. According to the newspaper, a little later, he would have lost his walking comrades in circumstances that remain to be clarified. Around 10:20 p.m., Lucas dials 112, the European emergency number, explaining to the call handler that he is tired of wandering in the woods and his legs are starting to hurt. This article further states that the call lasted for around 8 minutes before it was abruptly cut off. With this worrying call and his friends noticing his absence, a search was quickly underway for Lucas. Helicopters fitted with thermal imaging cameras ascended to the skies, and search and rescue teams, along with volunteers, set out into the wilderness to find Lucas. As the days went on, as many as 90 people joined in the search for Lucas, but they found no trace of him. His friends and family appealed to the media for anyone with information to come forward and could do nothing but watch as the search continued. Just 1.5 days after Lucas disappeared, the search was called off, much to the disappointment of his family. The police began interviewing everyone present, but nobody was able to provide them with any solid clues. Lucas' father spoke to France Bleu, telling them the police combed the area on Wednesday and Thursday morning, but afterwards we did not see them anymore. We, with our friends, our family, volunteers of the sector, we then searched for a week, every day. In vain. We were just shown a map of what had been done, as if to say, now, manage. It was a walker who alerted to a suspicious smell on June 26. The police first believed in a runaway, and then I think if Lucas had been a minor, the search would have been longer, better organized. The Dog Association had offered to help us. The police refused. I don't understand. We should have pooled all our forces to find him. We might have been able to save him. On June 26, 2018, the world came to a standstill for Renault's when a fellow hiker found Lucas' body slumped against a tree, less than 2,000 feet from the waterfall's parking lot. The coroner was called to the scene, and he determined that Lucas' body was severely decomposed and that an autopsy would likely not yield any results. Positive identification was made through clothing and DNA, and the Renault family began their grieving process. Due to the level of decomposition, the coroner was not able to determine a time or cause of death, but ruled out any serious injury. A toxicology test was also run with the results detecting the presence of drug molecules corresponding to a treatment prescribed to Lucas, but within the limits of therapeutic dosage. This, therefore, made it impossible to evaluate the thesis of intoxication. His family, understandably, were incredibly displeased with the investigation into their son's disappearance and eventual passing. His mother gave an interview to France Bleu, telling them, "The police made me listen to the call so that I could identify my son's voice. I was upset. I did not have the force to listen to everything." In the recording, Lucas' call handler does not give him advice, does not ask him the right questions. Instead of telling him not to move, he asks him to try to find a way out. And then it cuts off. Unfortunately, it seems that there is no resolution for Lucas' family. Due to the level of decomposition, his family were not allowed to view him before the burial as his body was, quote, too damaged. Lucas was laid to rest, and now his family are fighting for answers and justice. His family sent letters to the authorities in France, but it appears that those letters were ignored, leading them to file a complaint via a lawyer. His mother has also accused a public prosecutor of withholding the autopsy report from them and other information. Anyone with any information is urged to contact the French police at 0800 004712 or 0384 358600. Number 4, Jeff Haig. 16-year-old Jeff Haig of Morristown, Tennessee, along with 2 other boys, Lee Smith and Stephen Wolf, went on a hike into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, led by their scout leader Eugene Smith and assistant scout leader Marvin Horner. There was also an additional chaperone, Reverend Pister Lyons, in February 1970. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information about Jeff other than that he lived with his mother, father, and 3 siblings in Morristown, and that he attended New Concord School. Jeff, along with other boys his age, were involved in Troop 95 of the Explorer Scouts, whose mission was to get young people into the great outdoors and teach them valuable survival skills as well as life lessons along the way. On February 7, 1970, the troop entered the park and made their way through, looking for a suitable place to set up camp for the night. By the next morning, the troop and its leaders were ready to return home. With equipment and the boys in tow, the leaders began retracing their steps and making their way back to the parking lot. While they started with 3 boys, they ended up leaving the park with just 2. According to reports, while they were making the return hike, Jeff stopped at the junction of the Appalachian Trail and Boulevard Trail for a rest. He also planned on waiting for Lee Smith, one of his fellow troop members, who had been following the group at his own pace. Eugene, the troop leader, okayed this decision, and the group agreed to meet back at the parking lot in half an hour or so. 30 agonizing minutes passed before Lee Smith emerged from the park and into the parking lot, but there was no sign of Jeff. Lee said he hadn't seen Jeff on the trail, and it was then that the leaders knew that Jeff was likely in danger. A large search party was organized, and hundreds of volunteers quickly poured in to find the missing teen. The searchers were joined by sniffer dogs, and the groups carefully combed through the park and the trail junctions for 10 days. Unfortunately, their efforts were hindered when snow began to fall and temperatures plummeted. When the conditions cleared, a horrifying discovery was made. Jeff's body was found, frozen, with his socks removed, one boot missing, and his pants pulled down. To add to the mystery, his hiking bag and equipment were found 1,000 feet away in a river, the contents strewn and scattered about as if someone had been looking for something. The coroner ruled that Jeff had succumbed to exposure, but that didn't explain why articles of clothing were missing or that his pants had been pulled down. Is it possible Jeff became hypothermic and was struck by a paradoxical undressing? This phenomenon can make those who are dangerously cold experience a sudden flash of warmth that makes them take their clothes off to cool down. Since his discovery and funeral, Jeff's case has remained a case of exposure. But how did he end up alone and in a position to perish? What caused him to disappear in such a narrow time frame? And why did nobody see or hear anything? Is Jeff's case a simple one of getting lost and succumbing to the elements? Or is there something darker going on in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park? If you recall, this was only about a year after Dennis Martin disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains Park, never to be found again. Number 3, Cullen Finnerty. 30-year-old Cullen Finnerty had a whole host of accolades under his belt. He had played for several NFL teams and was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens in 2007 after an incredibly successful college career. There are simply too many honors and awards to mention here, but there is no doubt that Cullen was an exceptionally talented American football star and that both on and off the field, he was going to go far. In 2010, Cullen married his girlfriend, Jennifer, and the couple welcomed 2 children into the world, Caden and McKinley, completing their family. To the outside world, the lives of the Finnertys seemed perfect. Cullen was a football star and had a great family life. But one weekend fishing would turn that upside down and leave the sports world with so many questions that remain unanswered. On May 26, 2013, Cullen said goodbye to his wife and 2 children for what would be the last time. Cullen was dropped off at the Bray Creek State Forest campground and was headed toward the Baldwin River to do a little bit of fishing. At this time, the Finnertys were on vacation, and Cullen wanted to make the most of his trip before they had to return home. He waved goodbye to his family, telling them that he would see them later when they came to collect him. By 10:30 p.m. that night, a distressing 911 call was made to the local police, telling them that Cullen Finnerty was missing. During the call, his family detailed how they had driven back to the campground to pick him up, but there was no sign of him. His boat was there, but there was no Cullen. This immediately sent alarm bells ringing, and within hours, the Bray Creek State Forest was abuzz with police and search and rescue activity. Investigators began talking to his family and digging into his personal life, desperately trying to uncover any clue, and they found a huge one. On the night of his disappearance, Cullen had made 2 phone calls, one to his beloved wife Jennifer and one to his brother-in-law. In the phone call to his wife, Cullen was distressed and paranoid. Jennifer heard rustling in the background, and when she asked him what it was, he told her that he was taking his clothes off. During the call with his wife, Cullen also called out to the man he believed to be 20 feet behind him. Then, the phone call to his brother-in-law at 9:36 p.m. was the last activity on Cullen's phone. And while the call was only 20 seconds long, it included some chilling details. According to the brother-in-law, Cullen told him, "I don't know where I am," and also that he had encountered 2 men on the Baldwin River and that he thought they were following him. According to a New York Times article, this wasn't the first time that Cullen had been overwhelmed by paranoia. As reported by the New York Times, in 2011, Cullen was working in Detroit. Out of the blue, he hopped into his car and drove to Grand Rapids to his older brother Tim's house. He told Tim that he had to leave Detroit abruptly because he was being followed. This behavior worried Tim, and he told the New York Post that it was the only time he had ever seen his brother genuinely scared to death. The search for Cullen intensified with the Lake County Sheriff's Office, 22 reserve officers, and 100 volunteers joining the search as the days progressed. The search came to a screeching halt on May 28, 2013, however, with the discovery of Cullen's body by his parents who had joined in with the search. According to reports, Cullen was found lying face down with his arms at his sides, wearing the same clothes he had left in on May 26. His family, friends, and associates were devastated by the news. To them, it made no sense. Cullen had a successful career in medical sales, was an accomplished American football player, and had a steady, happy home life with a wife and kids. Why would he wander into the woods? And why did he believe he was being followed? According to his wife, Jennifer, Cullen was in recovery from addiction to painkillers, and he kept on track after going into rehab. But in the days before his disappearance, she noticed a massive shift in his behavior. Cullen had reported pain in his jaw and left arm and had gotten little sleep, which was very out of character for him. In fact, his family jokingly called him Mr. Nap, due to his ability to outsleep everyone else. On the day of his disappearance, Jennifer noticed another bizarre shift in Cullen's behavior. She told USA Today that Cullen had slept for 3 to 5 hours that night and had turned down dinner. This was an odd behavior for a man who was known to sleep for long hours like a baby, and she also noticed that his eyes appeared beady. Cullen had also consumed several alcoholic drinks that day, but this was a vacation after all. At 8 p.m., Cullen donned his fishing gear and headed out on what would be his last ever trip. All this was taken into consideration by the coroner, and when Cullen's autopsy was performed, it revealed some troubling answers. According to the autopsy report, Cullen had been suffering from CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is common in those who frequently receive blows to the head, such as football players. This disorder degenerates the brain and causes memory loss, dementia, depression, changes in mood, and difficulty making decisions, along with a myriad of other things. Medical records indicated that he had only suffered one concussion during his freshman year, and that the school dealt with the matter promptly and the incident was recorded. His family later stated that Cullen had probably suffered 4 or 5 more real serious concussions and dozens more smaller ones along the way. His brother had also jokingly called him a meathead during a speech at his wedding and said, "He's lucky he found you because he's no longer getting into bar fights." Cullen also suffered from 2 herniated discs, which led to him being prescribed the prescription painkillers. The coroner also noted in the report that Cullen had a slightly enlarged heart and slightly cloudy lungs, and no trauma or marks to the body. Further going on to state that Cullen Finnerty's anxiety and paranoia in the woods the night of May 26th may have been exacerbated by an elevated level of painkillers and the CTE. Stephen Cole, the Kent County Chief Medical Examiner, would also later tell the press Finnerty became incapacitated before inhaling his own vomit and choking. While it appeared that the Finnertys finally had a conclusion, the Boston University Center for the Study of Traumatic Encephalopathy also made their own conclusions. Cullen's brain was sent to them for further testing, where they determined that the severity of CTE was moderate, and it's highly unlikely that disease alone led to his death. So then what happened to Cullen Finnerty that night? The medical examiner's office noted that the CTE and painkiller toxicity was present in Cullen, but no one has been able to provide the family with any concrete answers. The Boston University Center that studied Cullen's brain made a statement saying CTE possibly affected his judgment, insight, and behavior, but there are other factors, including the use of medications prescribed by his doctor, that most likely contributed to the circumstances surrounding his death. Unfortunately, because of the complexity of his medications and medical status, it is impossible to determine the specific combination of factors that led to his tragic death. So something happened to Cullen Finnerty in the wilderness that brisk May night. But what? Did he have a paranoid episode, or was someone really out to get him? For now, it seems that the case is closed. That is until more evidence comes to light. Number 2, Garrett Bardsley. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley loved baseball and being in the great outdoors with his father. On August 20th, 2004, Garrett and his father were on a Boy Scout camping trip in the Uinta Mountains in the Uinta-Wasatch Cache National Forest. There were around 7 adults and 18 children on the trip, and it promised to be an exciting outing for all. Children excitedly rushed into the forest where the Uinta Mountains are located and were eager to get going on their hike. After setting up camp and settling in, Garrett, his father, and the rest of the group made their way to Lake Cumberland 1 to do a spot of fishing. Armed with fishing rods, nets, and bait, The group happily walked down the 150 or so yard path that led from their campsite to the lake. During the fishing trip, Garrett got his shoes, socks, and pants wet and complained to his father that they made him uncomfortable. So, Garrett asked his dad if he could walk back to the camp to change his clothes. Garrett's father agreed, but this would be the last time that Garrett Bardsley was ever seen. His father shouted out directions to Garrett, reminding him which forks and directions to take to get to the campsite. According to one report, while Garrett was making his way back to the camp, his father heard someone shouting "Dad," but didn't investigate these shouts. 15 minutes had now passed since Garrett had made the 150-yard trek to the campsite, and he still had not returned. Worried, Garrett's father began searching the path and the campsite, thinking that his son had possibly taken a wrong turn. But there was no sign of him. This is when panic set in, and the gravity of the situation took hold of his father. After speaking to the scouts at the site, Garrett's father discovered that no one had seen him. He quickly put out an alert for his son, and the Summit County Sheriff's Office was called to the scene. The campsite that had once been filled with the laughter of scouts was now eerily quiet, as volunteers and investigators began combing through the area, looking for any sign of the boy. In all, 200 volunteers and search and rescue teams from Cache County, Salt Lake County, Wasatch County, and Duchesne County joined the search for the missing 12-year-old boy. As word spread about his disappearance, horse units were even called in. Despite this huge collaborative effort, no sign of Garrett was discovered. In the days following Garrett's disappearance, only one clue was found: a soggy Nike sock about a half-mile from the campground and the lake. Garrett's mother confirmed to investigators that the sock belonged to her son. However, the Charlie Project interestingly notes, but one of the searchers claimed it was his own. With little evidence to work with, the Summit County Sheriff's Office concluded that it was unlikely that Garrett had been kidnapped, and the search was called off 9 days after he was last seen. His family continued to search for him, employing the help of volunteers and desperately hoping to find any trace of their son. Unfortunately, nothing has ever been found, and investigators believe that Garrett likely got lost on his way to or from the campsite and that he died from exposure. While investigators believe that he perished due to this exposure, this theory would be turned upside down in 2009. According to the park record, a woman came forward in 2009 claiming to have spotted Garrett in Nevada. In fact, she called this tip into the TV show America's Most Wanted, who then passed it on to the police. This anonymous woman claimed that she saw Garrett in a Smith's store in the company of 2 men in July of 2009. It appears that this lead was followed up and CCTV footage was examined, but nothing else has come of this mysterious sighting since. Garrett Bardsley was last seen on August 20, 2004, near the Uinta Mountains in the Uinta-Wasatch National Forest. He is described as a white male with light brown hair, hazel eyes, standing 5 foot tall and weighing 105 pounds. At the time of his disappearance, Garrett no longer had braces, which are often shown on missing posters. His hair was also longer, and he has a birthmark on his right forearm. When last seen, Garrett was wearing a black Quicksilver pullover, reversible Nike sweatpants with one side being red and silky fabric with a black and white stripe, and the other side being black mesh with a red and white stripe, a white t-shirt, Nike ankle socks, and white Converse with black or navy stars on the side. Anyone with any information is urged to contact Lieutenant Alan Sidaway of the Summit County Sheriff's Office at 453-615-3600 and reference case 04L12342. Number 1. Jerika Binks. 24-year-old Jerika Binks was on her way to getting her life back on track. In late 2017, early 2018, Jerika had voluntarily moved into a sober living facility and was responding well to treatment. During her time at the facility, Jerika would take daily runs, sometimes running as far as 10-15 miles at once, and she had also taken up self-defense classes in order to defend herself should the occasion arise. We all know that both exercise and getting outdoors is great for your health and mental well-being, and no doubt employees at the facility likely encouraged Jerika to channel her energy into something like running. Sadly, however, Jerika's running routine would end in tragedy with her disappearance and eventual demise. February 18, 2018 started normally. Jerika donned her running gear and told her roommate that she was going for her usual run. The two said their goodbyes and Jerika left the treatment center. Her route was confirmed when trail cameras captured her running down through the American Fork Canyon in the Uinta-Wasatch Cache National Park. More specifically, cameras captured her running down the Timpanogos Cave Trail with her water bottle, phone, and earbuds. After that, the trail goes cold. As Jerika lived in a sober living facility, the alarm was raised very quickly when she failed to return home that night, and Jerika's mother was immediately contacted. While the facility she lived at did act swiftly regarding her disappearance, it appears that the police did not. Jerika's mother reported her daughter missing to the police, but the missing person report had been filed in the wrong district, causing huge delays in the investigation. It wasn't until 8 days after Jerika had been last seen that the police finally launched a full investigation and search for her. Investigators began to trace her last steps and noted that Binks had gone off the proper trail and continued her run into the afternoon in an area of the park that was closed for winter. Search and rescue crews, police departments, and volunteers scoured the area looking for Jerika, doing whatever they could despite the wet and windy conditions. At some point during the search, snow began to fall, which made it difficult to traverse and the roads became blocked. Despite the conditions, volunteers and personnel turned up every day in good spirits, determined to bring peace and justice to Jerika's family. But there was just no sign of her. Eventually, the search was called off, but the investigation into her disappearance continued. According to photographer Brittany Lisenby, who was on the trail on February 18th, she had heard gunshots in the area. She also allegedly came across a campsite that looked as though someone had set it up for a ritual, complete with sharpened sticks arranged in a deliberate way. The police were unable to find any connections between the strange camp and Jerika's disappearance, however, and it continues to be an odd tidbit in her case. On April 14, 2019, 14 months after Jerika had disappeared, a shocking discovery was made by a hiker making their way through a rocky ravine under the Swinging Bridge picnic area in the national park. The hiker himself described the terrain as very difficult to get up. It's not a trail where people commonly go hiking. This location was where Jerika's body was discovered. The location where Jerika's body was discovered has also been described as halfway up a steep ravine, away from any trails or man-made structures, roughly a mile northwest of the Swinging Bridge picnic area, and half a mile from the trailhead where Jerika was last seen. Authorities were alerted to the find, and by April 17, 2019, they confirmed that the remains belonged to the missing Jerika Binks. The remains were skeletal, and it appears that a cause of death has not been confirmed, although it is believed to have been accidental. According to reports, Jerika had suffered a serious break to both bones in the lower part of one of her legs, although investigators cannot be sure how these injuries were obtained. Since the discovery of her remains in 2019, there's been little movement in the case, with authorities labeling it as an accident, death by misadventure. But how did Jerika end up halfway up a steep ravine? Did she fall or did someone put her there? Hopefully, one day we'll have answers. Number 10. Mitchell Dale Stelling. What should have been a quick and relaxing hike to the Spruce Treehouse in the Mesa Verde National Park in the summer of 2013 quickly transformed into a nightmare for the Stelling family. On June 9, 2013, 51-year-old Mitchell Stelling, who commonly went by his middle name Dale, his wife Dina, and Mitchell's parents were on a tour of the national parks in the West. With some time left over, the group headed to Mesa Verde National Park. After all, Dale had always dreamed of visiting the park and wanted to see what Colorado as a state had to offer. According to the National Park Service, the Mesa Verde National Park's trails are mostly difficult and strenuous, and the park is also the ancestral and sacred home to 26 tribes in the area. The park is described as hot and arid and is not for the faint of heart. The Mesa Verde National Park rangers are committed to the preservation of the cultural sites of indigenous tribes, and as such, it's illegal to hike off-trail. The NPS website is filled with warnings, cautions, and information, reminding prospective hikers just how dangerous the park can be. Initially, the plan was for Dale, Deenan, and his parents to drive to an overlook point where they could safely take in the scenery of the park from the safety of their camper. Dale was known to friends and family as a keen outdoorsman, and while the three others with him that day wanted to stay inside the camper, he wanted to explore. At around 4:30 p.m., Dale left the group, telling them that he was going to hike down the quarter-of-a-mile trail to the Spruce Tree House, which is filled with heritage items. His family waved him goodbye, thinking he would be back soon, but unfortunately, Dale never returned. After 2 hours had painfully ticked by with no sign of Dale, his family went to the nearest park ranger station to report him missing. Soon after, a wide-scale search for Dale was underway, with park rangers and volunteers scouring the park for any sign of him. During the initial investigation, witnesses recalled seeing Dale on the Petroglyph Point Trail, a trail that is described as strenuous by the NPS. This group told investigators that Dale seemed fine and in good spirits, and this is the last confirmed sighting of him. The Petroglyph Point Trail runs at an intersection with the trail to the Spruce Tree House, and Deneen, Dale's wife, believed that he may have wandered off course with the heat and lack of water affecting his better judgment. In the first 24 hours of Dale's disappearance, more than 70 people, plus search dogs and helicopter teams, joined in the search effort. However, after just 2 days, the search effort was scaled back. Now, this scaling back of the operation understandably upset Dale's family. However, park rangers confirmed that they did continue to search for Dale and hadn't given up, just that the search was being conducted more conservatively. As the months passed, Dale's family held out hope that he would be found and reunited with them, but as the first anniversary of his disappearance came, they knew that he was more than likely deceased. Deneen, Dale's parents, and everyone else who knew Dale never gave up their search for him, and it wouldn't be until September 2020 that they would finally get answers. In a press release in late 2020, the National Park Service confirmed that the remains of Mitchell Dale Stelling had been discovered on September 17, 2020, around 4.2 miles from where he was last seen. According to the release, an anonymous tip submitted to us led to the discovery of human remains in a remote area of the park, not accessible to the public. U.S. Park Rangers, an ISB special agent, and personnel from Montezuma County Coroner's Office located and covered the remains on September 17, 2020. Days after the remains had been discovered, they were identified as indeed belonging to Mitchell Dale Stelling, who had disappeared in 2013. Unfortunately, the National Park Service has not released a manner or cause of death at this time, and it appears that they have since closed the investigation. They have stated that they do not believe that Dale met with foul play, but are refusing to say anything further on the matter. Rest in peace, Dale, and our condolences to your family. Number 9, Kenny Miller. In 1982, the Miller family of Fresno, California, were struck with tragedy when their only son, 2-year-old Kenny, was struck by meningitis. Kenny barely survived, and as a result, was left with excessive brain swelling that hampered his development greatly. Unfortunately, as Kenny grew older, it became obvious to the doctors and his parents that the bout of meningitis had done long-term damage, and Kenny was left with the mental faculties of a 4-year-old child by the age of 12. However, Sharon and Bob Miller were determined to do anything they could to help their only son and work to enrich his life in whatever way they could. One LA Times article mentions that both the Millers worked as school teachers and were determined not to shut their son away, but to get him into the outdoor world. Following Kenny's illness, his mother, Sharon, had even gone back to school to obtain a degree in speech therapy so that she could help her son recover. In June 1992, the Millers decided to take Kenny hiking in the Sierra Nevada and into the Yosemite National Park. What should have been a happy occasion for the Millers quickly turned into a tragedy, and just 10 years after they'd almost lost their son for the first time, they would lose him again. According to Sharon and Bob, Kenny was happily throwing stones into a creek, giggling and keeping himself occupied. Also on that trip was Kenny's little sister, and it said that the three turned away for what would be a matter of seconds. Within the blink of an eye, as they turned back around, Kenny was gone. They hoped that he had merely wandered off after seeing an animal or maybe a shiny rock nearby, but as they began to search for him, their worst fears were confirmed. While Kenny was active and lively, his abilities meant that he was not like your normal 12-year-old boy, and his parents knew that. Minutes after the Millers had discovered that Kenny was missing, Bob was seen running through the Pacific Crest Trail, asking anyone if they had seen his son, while also keeping an eye out for his beloved Kenny. People listened to Bob as he explained his situation and offered to lend a helping hand. As darkness fell, Bob, Sharon, and volunteers kept looking for Kenny, and by the next morning, even more volunteers had poured onto the Pacific Crest Trail to look for the little boy. Sharon later told the LA Times, "When that busload arrived, I can't tell you how that made us feel. People I didn't even know had come up to search for my son. We were very, very overwhelmed." The same article detailed how at around 1 a.m. that morning, over 50 people had piled onto a bus set for Lake Tahoe on the Pacific Crest Trail where the Millers were located. Volunteers, the Alpine County Sheriff's Office, and the Madera County Sheriff's Office continued to search for Kenny, but there was just no sign of him. Weeks passed without any news, and the Millers slowly began to lose hope. Then, just a month after Kenny disappeared, his family were hit with the tragic news. On a ridge near Stevens Peak, close to Mice Meadow, lay Kenny's body. The ridge upon which Kenny was found was described as rocky terrain at about 9,800 feet elevation. To this day, nobody's ever been able to explain how Kenny made it up there by himself. Unfortunately, the recovery of his remains were hindered due to bad weather, with the LA Times reporting California Highway Patrol helicopter crew tried to retrieve the body earlier in the day, but the craft was unable to land because of high winds. Kenny's official cause of death was listed as exposure, but there are very few articles pertaining to his disappearance. His family were understandably devastated by the news and the loss of their only son. Many people believe that there is no way Kenny could have made it up into an area filled with rocky terrain and large, thick bushes. Is there something nefarious behind Kenny's disappearance? Although it seems likely, it also seems likely that we'll never know. Rest in peace, Kenny, and our condolences to the family. Number 8, Dennis Martin. June 14, 2020 marked the 53rd anniversary of the vanishing of a little 6-year-old boy, Dennis Lloyd Martin. Dennis was the light of his parents' lives, and what should have been a happy, joyful Father's Day in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park quickly turned into a nightmare for the Martin family. On June 13, 1969, William Martin entered the Great Smoky Mountains National Park with his 2 sons, Douglas and Dennis, and his father, Clyde. Martins were embarking on what had been a long-standing family tradition for Father's Day, with the group planning to camp and hike. As they entered the park, the group first hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field, where they pitched their tents and settled in for the night. This first night went without a hitch, and Martin's men gathered around the fire, eating the food they had prepared, with the 2 adults telling the children stories. It wasn't just the Martins at the camp, though. Family, friends, and some extended family had joined them in their tradition, and everyone was excited to get a good night's sleep after the long day of hiking. When the sun rose on June 14, 1969, William Martin had no idea that within a few hours his entire world would be turned upside down. After packing up their gear and setting their course, the group headed to Spence Field, which is located close to the Appalachian Trail. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park spans 5,222,427 acres, and some of the trails are very difficult. Nevertheless, Dennis reportedly kept up with the adults and even surprised some with his hiking abilities. As the group neared Spence Field, everyone gazed on in amazement, taking in the beauty and sheer size of what lay before them. While the adults took in the scenery, some of the children, including Douglas and Dennis, decided that they wanted to play a prank on the adults. According to Douglas Martin, the boys decided to sneak up and surprise the adults. Douglas and the other 2 boys went south and then west and came upon the adults, while Dennis went northwest, as it were, and intended to come upon the adults from a north and south direction. The time the boys parted was the last time Dennis was seen. As Dennis split away from his brother, the 2 had no idea it would be the last time they would see each other. An innocent child's prank, unfortunately, turned into a manhunt, and 53 years on, we are still no closer to the truth. As Douglas and the other children flanked the adults from the south, they eagerly awaited Dennis from the north, but he never showed. At first, they thought he could be waiting for the perfect time to strike, but as the minutes passed and there was no sign of him, they began to panic. Dennis' absence was immediately noted by the adults in Spence Field, and after listening to the children recall their story, the search for little Dennis began. William, Clyde, and the other adults with him ran through Spence Field, shouting Dennis' name, hoping that this was all part of their joke. At the time of his disappearance, Dennis was wearing a red shirt, which provided a stark contrast to the lush greenery around him. The group tore through the weeds, the trees, dodging rocks, and looking high and low for the boy. When the group had no luck, they knew they had to take drastic action. None of the group had radios or telephones, as in this was 1969. So Clyde, Dennis's grandfather, hiked 9 miles to the nearest park ranger station to report his grandson missing. He then hiked the additional 9 miles back, all while shouting his grandson's name and hoping to see the red t-shirt in the sea of green that surrounded him. The park rangers sprang into action and began assembling a team to look for the little boy. In the NPS report into Dennis' disappearance, the Park Service notes heavy rainstorms and thunderstorms moved in around dark and greatly hampered search activity. Precipitation was estimated to be 2.5 inches or more in the Spence Field area. All local streams were high and turbulent. Park rangers and the Martins battled through the tumultuous weather and began planning their search efforts for the next day. The NPS report into Dennis' disappearance notes the chief ranger set up the following plans for the morning. 1 crew of 30 men with 5 leaders, 10 crews of 2 to 4 men with 10 leaders, set up at a camp at Spence Field. Obtain a helicopter if possible. It appears that every effort was made to locate Dennis, and in total, over 1,400 showed up to help look. The search for Dennis Martin turned out to be the biggest search effort in the Great Smoky Mountain Park's history. But even with hundreds of men at their disposal, investigators failed to find any sign of the little boy. By June 20th, 1969, Dennis' 7th birthday had come around and his family were left to celebrate the occasion without him. The search for Dennis continued, with new volunteers and search and rescue personnel flooding into the park each day to help find him. The only possible clue discovered was a footprint. However, many investigators have said that the footprint was actually caused by a Boy Scout who was helping look for Dennis. There was a sock and a shoe found, but there was no correlation between the sock and the shoe and Dennis ever made. With thousands of man-hours under their belt, investigators knew the outlook was bleak for little Dennis Martin. After 2 weeks of searching high and low for Dennis, the authorities made the tough decision to scale back their efforts. The search would still continue for Dennis well into late 1969, just not at the scale that it had been operating at before. Dennis' parents, understandably heartbroken, offered a $5,000 reward, which in today's money would be about $40,000, for any information that led to their son's whereabouts. This reward made it appear as though Dennis had possibly been kidnapped, but the authorities confirmed that there was no evidence to support this theory. In fact, there is little evidence to work with in Dennis' case, and to this day, the search for little Dennis Martin remains the largest ever search in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over the years, several leads have arisen, such as the lead discovered in the first few years after Dennis disappeared. The Knoxville News reported that a ginseng hunter found the skeletal remains of a young child while he was out foraging. However, due to the illegal nature of his ginseng gathering, this anonymous man never reported his findings to the police, for fear that he would be arrested. It wasn't until almost 20 years later, in 1985, that this man finally came forward and told someone what he had found. Unfortunately, by the time investigators and searchers managed to scour the area, the remains were either gone or hadn't been there in the first place. This lead has never been confirmed by investigators, and nothing has ever come of it since. The disappearance of Dennis leaves us with 3 main theories, and some are more chilling than the others. The first and most straightforward theory is that Dennis wandered too far from the group and became lost. To a child, the endless lines of trees and rocks can be incredibly confusing, and before you know it, you're nowhere near where you started. After getting lost, Dennis could have perished due to exposure and a lack of food and water. If Dennis had gotten lost, how had search and rescue crews not found his body as they were scouring the area? 1,400 people, as we stated, joined in on the search, with helicopters and several different agencies offering their assistance, so it seems like it would have been hard for them to miss him. This leads us on to the second theory, abduction. In the aftermath of Dennis' disappearance, his parents put up a $5,000 reward for information, despite the fact that there was no evidence to suggest Dennis had been taken. Harold Key, who was hiking with his family at the time of Dennis' disappearance, recalled to investigators that on the afternoon Dennis disappeared, he heard a sickening scream and also saw a strange-looking man darting through the woods before jumping into a white car and speeding away. Did the Key family hear Dennis being kidnapped? If so, who was the man with the white car and why did he take Dennis? Was this a crime of opportunity, or had this bizarre man been following the family and plotting his crime? Well, the abduction theory also ties into another bizarre theory that floats around online. Some people believe that Dennis was kidnapped by a strange cannibalistic group who hid themselves deep into the park to avoid detection. Again, there's no evidence to support this theory, and yet it seems to be another bizarre online conspiracy surrounding a cold case. The final theory is that Dennis was attacked by a wild animal, such as a bear, which may explain the blood-curdling scream that the Key family heard that afternoon. But with no physical evidence recovered from the scene, it's hard to say for certain what happened to little Dennis Martin. Father's Day is now a somber time for the Martin family, a time for reflection and remembrance. While reading through the National Park Service file on Dennis' case, which is available on the NPS website, we came across an interesting page. On page 61 of the report is a long-distance telephone call record dated July 23, 1970, a year after Dennis disappeared. The log is about a call from the Chief of Police, Hugh Wells, to Chief Ranger Snedden. The message reads, Chief Wells said he received an anonymous phone call from a woman, stating that about 3 weeks ago, she had seen the Martin child in a white automobile with Tennessee license plates, did not get the number, on Cecil Street in Knoxville, Tennessee. She said that the man driving the car was bald, between 38 and 45 years of age, and there was also another child in the car. She said that the child had redacted his head out of the window, and she was positive it was the Martin child, and that since seeing the child, she had looked again at his pictures and therefore the report. According to Wells, she would not reveal her name because she did not want any publicity, but the more she thought about the child, the more sure she was that it was in fact the Martin boy. The fate of this lead and the boy that the anonymous woman saw in the car has remained a mystery. 53 years on, and Dennis Martin still remains missing. It's one of the Great Smoky Mountains' most enduring cases, and Dennis' family are desperate that one day they will know the truth of what happened to little Dennis. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Great Smoky Mountains National Park at 865-436-1230 and reference case number 061469. Just as a side note here, I've followed this case personally since its inception. I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee at the time. I was just about a year younger than Dennis, and it was the first time in my little child mind that I came to grips with the fact that, yes, a child could go missing and never be found. I held out hope for Dennis, scanned the newspapers every day after his disappearance looking for news. Back somewhere I have 2 scrapbooks full of clippings. This case touched me and stayed with me. Dennis, wherever you are, rest in peace. Number 7, Gail Stewart. The case of Gail Stewart is as bizarre as it is unbelievable. On February 14th, 2022, Gail left her home in Coughlin Ranch, Reno, Nevada. There are few details in regards to this disappearance. We don't know where Gail had planned going or why she'd left the house even. When she failed to return home and make contact with her family, however, she was reported missing and a search party was formed. Her friends, family, the local police department, and the Reno Fire Department all sprang into action, desperately looking for any sign of her. Thankfully, within a matter of hours of Gail disappearing, she was found by a friend of her son's on a steep slope on Alum Creek. Gail was found clinging to a tree to ensure that she wouldn't fall down the slope, and a friend of her son had happened upon the slope by chance. Reports indicate that Gail was found in a popular hiking area, and it has still not been determined how or why she'd gotten onto the slope. NBC News reported that after shouting for help, Gail went unresponsive, and medical crews found that she was extremely hypothermic and was suffering from trauma. Gail was retrieved from the tree by the Reno Fire Department and was transferred to the local hospital where she made a full recovery. Her friends and family were extremely grateful for the efforts of everyone involved in the search and rescue mission for Gail, but unfortunately, her story doesn't end here. Just 1 month after Gail was found clinging to a tree, she would mysteriously disappear again. On March 14, 2022, Gail left her home in Reno, Nevada once more and headed toward the Hoover Dam in the Lake Mead National Recreation Area, over 479 miles from her home in Coughlin Ranch. Gail had gone to visit the Hoover Dam to take pictures, and the last time she was spotted was in the bypass bridge parking area of the park. After this, there's been no sign of Gail. According to the National Park Service, Gail had traveled to the area to take photographs and did not return to her vehicle. She did not have her phone or any identification on her at the time. Just like Gail's first disappearance, there's barely any information or any clues to work with, and her family is desperate to find her. The National Park Service is asking anyone who may have seen Gail or anyone who was in the area that day to please come forward. They addressed the media in a press conference saying, though no further details for this ongoing missing person investigation are available at this time, information from other visitors is often very helpful to investigators. The National Park Service, search and rescue crews, and local police departments are doing everything they can to locate Gail. But with the Lake Mead National Recreation Area spanning over 1,495,806 acres, it's hard to search every corner of it. Gail Stewart is described as a white female with blonde hair, blue eyes, stands 5 foot 8 inches tall, and weighs 125 pounds. She was last seen wearing a black long-sleeve shirt, black leggings, and black shoes. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch, 888-653-0009. Number 6. John Pennington. 40-year-old John Pennington was last seen on the south rim of the Grand Canyon in the Grand Canyon National Park at the end of February 2021. While John was eventually found deceased, there are few details about both his disappearance and his demise. We know that John entered the Grand Canyon National Park on or around February 23, 2021, and abandoned his vehicle near Yaqui Point, located in Arizona. When John, originally from Kentucky, failed to make contact with his family and also failed to leave the park, a search effort was coordinated. Local authorities and search and rescue crews scoured the park, and a week later, they had the task of giving John's family the devastating news. According to reports, John's body and motorbike were found 465 feet below the canyon's rim at the South Kaibab trailhead. In the days following his disappearance, authorities released to the public that John may have been traveling with a yellow 2005 Suzuki GSX R600 motorbike, but no further information about this bike has ever been released. After John's body was discovered, the Coconino County Medical Examiner's Office transported his body via helicopter to the Medical Examiner's Office for further testing and identification. In a statement to the press, the National Park Service said, based on evidence found with the body, the individual is believed to be missing person John Pennington. Since the announcement of John's body being discovered in March of 2021, there have been very few reports, and according to reports written in March of 2021, the investigation was still ongoing. This case is bizarre due to the lack of details we have about it. What happened to John? Why did he abandon his motorbike, and how was it later found with his body? Why did he enter the park alone? We have very little to work with, and as a result, there are very few conclusions to make. According to his National Park Service profile, his cause of death is listed as undetermined, and the case status notes remains found pending ID. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch at 888-653-0009. Number 5. Noemi Alcodas. There's been little media attention surrounding Noemi's disappearance, and we here at Missing Persons Mysteries believe that everyone deserves to have their case heard. On October 10, 2014, 34-year-old Noemi Alcodas and her boyfriend, Jojo Acosta, entered the Hanauma Bay State Park in Hawaii for what should have been a peaceful and relaxing day. The two had planned to hike in the Bay Area, and it's believed that they were possibly headed to Rock Bridge. According to sources, however, Rock Bridge is actually closed off to the public due to the dangerous terrain and the chances of being swept away by the crashing waves below. Despite this, though, many hikers risk life and limb to get to Rock Bridge, and while most people make it out unscathed, not everyone is so lucky. In the months before she disappeared, Noemi had posted several photos to her Facebook page showing her in the park and also along one of the trails that leads to the infamous Rock Bridge. Noemi and her boyfriend, Jojo, were last seen around 7 a.m. on the morning of October 10, 2014, and by 1 p.m. the alarm bell had been raised. Noemi and Jojo's bags had been found unattended on the rocks by other hikers in the Rock Bridge area, and the other hikers knew that something was wrong. Thanks to their quick thinking and fast actions, the authorities were alerted of the pair's disappearance and the search effort began. Unfortunately, just hours into the search, Jojo's body was found in the waters below. The Honolulu Fire Department, who had joined in with the search for the missing couple, told Hawaii News Now it was actually close to the shoreline. Fire personnel who were conducting the search on land, as well as personnel on watercraft, spotted the body and brought it to shore. Authorities had found missing Jojo Acosta, but there was no sign of his girlfriend, Noemi. Over the course of the next few days, search and rescuers would use helicopters, boats, and dive crews to look for Noemi. At least 3 underwater searches were conducted for her, while the Honolulu Fire Department and other agencies carried on their search by land. By October 13, 2014, the search was officially called off, although the authorities are still conducting an investigation into Noemi's disappearance. The most prevailing theory is that, like her boyfriend, Jojo, she fell or was swept away by the waters in Rock Bridge and passed away there. Her family has never given up hope that one day they will find out what happened to her. Noemi Alcatis is described as an Asian female with brown hair, brown eyes, standing 5 feet tall and weighing 120 pounds. Noemi's ears are pierced, and she has an unspecified medical condition that requires daily medication. Anyone with any information is asked to contact Detective Michael Garcia of the Honolulu Police Department at 808-529-3111 and reference case 14-370311. Number 4, Julia Christine Devlin. 55-year-old Julia Christine Devlin was an extremely accomplished woman at the time of her disappearance. She was an economic lecturer at the University of Virginia, and before that, she'd been a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and an economist and a senior private sector development specialist at World Bank. Julia had obtained her bachelor's in economics, an MA in Arab studies with economics, and a doctorate from George Mason University. She was a well-loved and well-respected professor, so when she disappeared in July of 2021, everyone around her was both confused and devastated. Julia was last seen on July 14, 2021, entering the Shenandoah National Park in her white Lexus sedan, and after that, it's as if she simply disappeared. When she failed to turn up at work and failed to make contact with her family, the alarm bell was raised, and a few days after she had last been captured by CCTV entering the park, her car was found wrecked and abandoned on July 17, 2021. The only piece of information to be released in regards to Julia's car is that it was found in the Skyline Drive area in the south of the Shenandoah National Park, and that the car was headed to the other side of a cliff face. With this discovery, investigators knew that they had to find Julia as soon as possible, and the Shenandoah National Park Service, the FBI, National Park Service Investigative Services Branch, and other agencies, departments, and volunteers all began the arduous search for Julia. For almost 10 days, the group scoured the Shenandoah National Park by land and air, looking for any sign of her. Dog teams were brought in, and those on land covered hundreds of miles and racked up hundreds of man-hours. Despite the intense effort to find Julia, no sign of her was found until day 10 of the search. Unfortunately, 10 days after Julia was last seen, her body was discovered in what's been described as steep and rough terrain in the southernmost part of the park. Her remains were tentatively identified at the scene, and one report states that her remains were found a mere 600 meters from where her car had been abandoned and wrecked. Multiple agencies and groups had been involved in the search for Julia, including the Shenandoah National Park Service, the Virginia Department of Energy Management, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, the Albemarle Sheriff's Department, the FBI, the NPS Investigative Services Branch, and multiple search and rescue teams, dog teams, and incredible volunteers. Julia's body was transferred to the office of the medical examiner in Augusta County, who then confirmed the identification as Julia Devlin. As of this recording, no further comment has been made by the medical examiner's office or any of the other agencies involved. They have not disclosed whether Julia met with foul play or what other factors were at play in her case. It appears that Julia's case and investigation are ongoing. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office at 434-972-4001. Number 3, Thomas Reed. Saturday, the 13th of June, 2020, was supposed to be a happy day for 65-year-old Thomas Reed and his brother, but unfortunately, their blissful day turned into one of tragedy. Like with many cases featured in this episode of National Park Mysteries, there are very few details available in Thomas' case. So here is what we do know. On June 13th, 2020, Thomas and his brother set off hiking along the Center Point Trail near the Buffalo National River. As the two followed the trail, taking in the scenery and chatting to each other, they then turned down onto the Sneed Creek Trail, a trail of challenging terrain. According to alltrails.com, the trail is definitely not for inexperienced hikers. During the hike down Sneed Creek Trail, Thomas injured his leg and waited while his brother went to go get help. When his brother returned with a ranger, Thomas was nowhere to be found, and the National Park Service was immediately alerted. The Park Service, the Newton County Sheriff's Office, and the Arkansas State Police all joined in on the search for Thomas, searching by land and air, desperately trying to find any sign of the missing hiker. At the time of his disappearance, Thomas was not carrying adequate supplies to sustain him for a long trip, which only added to their worry. Searchers continued day and night, looking for any sign of Thomas, and then on June 17th, 2020, 4 days after he disappeared, his body was discovered. The full details have never been released, and the Springfield News Leader reported that his body was found a mile off the Sneed Creek Trail in a drainage area. The site was approximately 2.5 miles away from Hemden Hollow Waterfall along the Buffalo River. At this time, no cause of death has been released, and the authorities are keeping very tight-lipped about the entire investigation. Thomas' body was transported to the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory, and it appears that the investigation is ongoing. If you do have any information, you are asked to contact the Newton County Sheriff's Office at 870-446-5124. Number 2, James J. Arthur. 67-year-old James Jim Arthur was a proud U.S. military veteran who mysteriously disappeared while out on a hike in July of 2008. On July 28th of that year, James left his home and headed for the Star Lakes in the Sierra National Forest, just outside of the Yosemite National Park. According to his family, James had planned on heading down to the Star Lakes to do a bit of hiking and fishing before returning home. One hiker who went to Star Lakes said the following about the area: "Access to Star Lakes is by a combination of driving miles of dirt road and hiking. The last stretch of road is a bit rough, four-wheel drive for sure, and many people just hike it." James said his goodbyes, and his family watched as he got into his car, not knowing it would be the last time they would see him. As night came and there was no sign of James, his family began to panic. James told them that after he had finished up with his hiking, fishing, and photography, he would head into Big Sandy for a bite of lunch before returning home. However, hours dragged by, and his family reported him missing, knowing that he would never go off without telling them where he was. Soon, the Madera County Sheriff's Office, search and rescue teams, and other volunteers were at Star Lakes looking for any sign of the man. Over 100 people were involved in the search for James at Star Lakes, but they were unable to uncover any clues. That was until they decided to cast their nets further afield. Search and rescue teams decided to spread out. Upon doing so, they found James' dark blue Dodge Ram truck at the entrance of Iron Lakes, just about a mile and a half south of Star Lakes. Authorities quickly zoned in on the area and began questioning witnesses, and that's when they came across their next clue. One witness recalled seeing James on the day of his disappearance along the steep trail towards Iron Lakes. According to the Doe Network, these witnesses stopped and spoke to James for a little while, who told them he was hiking towards Iron Lakes and was stopping momentarily to have a rest. After that, James has never been seen or heard from again, and there's very little evidence to work with in his case. James was a U.S. military veteran, and he had also served as Air National Guard lieutenant and had been a spokesman for the 144th Fighter Wing. Despite the intense searches carried out, no sign of James has ever been uncovered. And July 28, 2022 will mark the 14th anniversary of his disappearance. His family are desperate for answers and want to know how James ended up getting lost while out on a simple day hike. James Jim Arthur is described as a white male with gray hair, brown eyes, standing 6 foot tall and weighing 189 pounds. At the time of his disappearance, James was carrying his camera with him, an Olympus SP550UZ, a cane, and a red backpack. It has also been speculated that James carried a pistol with him with snake shot rounds. He was last seen wearing a light jacket, an orange t-shirt, blue jeans, and a straw hat. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact Detective Tony Jackson of the Madera County Sheriff's Office at 559-675-7770 and refer to case number 83613. And number 1, Monty Howard Bolton. 27-year-old Monty Howard Bolton was last seen in the Channel Islands National Park in Ventura County, California on January 4th, 1992. Monty had grown up in Thousand Oaks, California, before later moving to Provo, Utah. At the time of his disappearance, Monty was a full-time student at Brigham Young University and was described by his family as a genius, exceptionally gifted at an early age in computers and mathematics. Unfortunately, Monty's bright future and the future of his younger brother, 21-year-old Brian, would be taken away, and to this day, Monty remains missing. At the end of 1991 and into the new year of 1992, Brian and Monty were visiting their parents in Thousand Oaks for the new year. On January 4th, Monty, Brian, along with their older brother and 2 brothers-in-law, boarded a sailboat and hit the water. The group ended up sailing to Anacapa Island to do some exploring and escape the house for a while. Monty and Brian wanted to explore it further and grabbed an 8-foot dinghy and decided to go to the sea caves and the coastline of the island. The others stayed behind on the sailboat and watched as Brian and Monty paddled off towards the north side. When they failed to return home later that night, though, this is when their family knew that something had happened. The Coast Guard and the Ventura County Sheriff's Department were immediately notified of the 2 men's disappearances, and a search and rescue effort was quickly established. The area around Anacapa Island was scoured thoroughly, looking for any sign of Brian and Monty. Early the next morning, January 5, 1992, the 8-foot dinghy the 2 men were traveling in was found 50 yards north of Cathedral Cave. The dinghy was said to have been upright, but partially filled with water. With the discovery of their dinghy, search crews headed into Cathedral Cave, which is where they discovered the body of Brian Bolton. An LA Times article reports that dive crews believed that they had found a second body while in the cave, but could not ascertain whether it was a piece of clothing or a body. Rough conditions forced them to suspend the search efforts. Carol Spears of the Channel Islands National Park later told the LA Times, in many of the sea caves, a portion of the cave is underwater and a portion of the cave is above water, but the swells can completely fill up the caves if they get heavy. Unfortunately, despite extensive searches, no sign of Monty Bolton has ever been found, and to this day, he remains missing. Monty's parents had chartered a private boat to help search for him, but this was to no avail. Investigators believe that Monty likely suffered the same fate as his brother. However, his body has never been recovered. Monty was last seen on January 4th, 1992, and is described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, standing 5 foot 9 inches tall and weighing 135 pounds. He was last seen wearing a blue and gray plaid coat and blue jeans. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Ventura County Sheriff's Office at 805-383-8704. Number 10, Timothy Philpott. 50-year-old Timothy Philpott was last seen at 7:45 a.m. in Ellsworth, Maine on January 12, 2016. After this, his movements are unknown, and this would be the last confirmed sighting of Timothy. For reasons that are unknown, Timothy made his way into the Acadia National Park in Maine and simply vanished. Officials do not believe that Timothy went hiking or skiing and have not offered any explanation as to why he was in the park. It wasn't until the following day, January 13, 2016, that the park rangers noticed his car was still in the Parkman Mountain parking lot, just off Maine Route 198 in Mount Desert. Park rangers had noticed the car the day before and found it odd that its owner still hadn't returned. A quick search of the area was conducted, but no sign of Timothy was found. According to the National Park Service file on Timothy, the Acadia National Park Service also attempted to contact him via telephone. However, when this was unsuccessful, they began a wider search and rescue operation. With Timothy failing to have made contact with the park rangers, it was clear that something was wrong. By January 14, 2016, the Mount Desert Search and Rescue, Maine Warden Service, and the Acadia National Park Service began their official search for him. Volunteers on the ground as well as helicopters were used in the search for Timothy, with the copters scanning through various areas of the park looking for any sign of the man. By the second day of the search, the Maine Association of Search and Rescue and Maine Search and Rescue Dogs had also joined in the operation, but unfortunately, there was just no sign of Timothy. According to articles, large snowstorms severely hampered their searches, and with this snow came increased concerns about Timothy's welfare. With the bitter Maine weather rolling in throughout most of January and February, search and rescue teams were forced to wait until the snow had subsided. But even then, they were unable to find any sign of Timothy. Months passed without any word, but then, as the sun slowly began to shine again, the horrific news came. In mid-April 2016, the National Park Service gave the following statement to the media, saying, "On Friday morning, April 15, 2016, 3 members of Maine Search and Rescue Dogs using 3 trained search dogs were searching an area of the park that had not been covered. At approximately 11 a.m., one of the search dogs alerted on a backpack that was found 40 feet downslope from the Around Mountain carriage road in a heavily forested area. The other 2 search dog teams moved to this location to broaden the search. At approximately 2:45 p.m., a search dog alerted on human remains, which were located 170 feet downslope from the location of the backpack. Now, a few days after this press release, the Maine office of the Chief Medical Examiner announced that the remains belonged to missing 50-year-old Timothy Philpott. The medical examiner has never released cause of death, and all articles surrounding Timothy's disappearance state that the results are pending. The only comment that has been made is by the Acadia National Park staff representative John Kelly, who told the Mount Desert Islander in April 2016, quote, "We're not commenting on the condition of the body. The location would not have been conducive to a fall because it's forested. It's not a precipice. If someone fell from the carriage road, they would have hit a tree and stopped," end quote. Timothy's obituary reads, "Tim was an avid hiker and enjoyed fishing and other outdoor activities and sports. He is very loved and will be greatly missed by all who knew him." His family also added that in lieu of flowers, they were asking for donations to the Acadia National Park. Timothy, rest in peace, my friend. Number 9, Joshua Jacobson. When 39-year-old Joshua Jacobson failed to make contact with his family in mid-July 2015, his family knew something had gone wrong. On July 16th of that year, Joshua was officially reported missing, and the search for him immediately began. Investigators discovered that Joshua had likely entered the Badlands National Park in southwestern South Dakota on July 12, 2015. Joshua's mother would later recall to the Norfolk Daily News how she often joked that he seemed incapable of staying in the same place for too long. Just a month before his disappearance, Joshua had left Lincoln for Norfolk, Nebraska, chasing a new job as a chef at the Claremont Steak and Chop House. He had recently completed his culinary arts degree at the Southeast Community College, and he appeared to be excited about the future. Joshua was interested in soul searching and was always looking to improve himself one way or another. His girlfriend, Darla Darnell, told the Norfolk Daily News he'd see opportunities and think maybe that's something better. He was always striving for more experience, more information, to take him to a different level. So, when Joshua announced that he was going on a vision quest in the Badlands National Park, nobody batted an eyelid. These kinds of soul-searching missions were not out of the ordinary for Joshua, who deeply admired Native American traditions and customs and was always looking to connect deeper with the spirit and nature herself. On July 12, 2015, Joshua said goodbye to his girlfriend and his family, with none of them knowing it would be the last time. Joshua had intended on going on a vision quest following his 39th birthday, but unfortunately, Joshua would not make it out of the Badlands National Park alive. Joshua didn't speak much to his family about the details of his vision quest, although his girlfriend would later give investigators a vital clue. According to the Norfolk Daily News, Darla believed that he had modeled his quest after the Lakota Himbosia, which translates to crying for a dream. Traditionally, it's a rite of passage rooted in self-sacrifice. The vision seeker deprived of food, water, and sleep over the course of several days. However, by July 16th, Joshua still hadn't made contact with his friends and family after entering the park, and that was when they knew something was off. On July 15th, 2015, a day before Joshua was reported missing, Darla left a message with the Badlands National Park Service, and as she awoke the next morning, she discovered that he had been reported missing. For Darla and Joshua's family, the entire event played out like a nightmare. Within hours of the report being filed, park rangers and search and rescue teams had entered the park looking for any sign of Joshua. On the second day of the search, July 17, 2015, a troubling clue had been discovered. Abandoned at the edge of the Sage Creek Wilderness area, searchers found Joshua's Dodge pickup, and according to reports, there was no sign he had made camp. His friends and family watched on as the search continued. Each day, new volunteers and search and rescue personnel poured into the park. The searchers were joined by a military helicopter and dog units, but still, no sign of Joshua could be found. The search for Joshua continued throughout the week, and by July 20th, 2015, the authorities had made the difficult decision to scale back the search. While the major efforts were scaled back, park officials and volunteers continued to work with Joshua's family to find him until the search was officially suspended on August 4th. Months passed without any updates, and then on September 15th, 2015, Joshua's name would make the headlines once again, but for a very somber reason. After the search was suspended on August 4th, the effort was picked up again on September 15th when searchers found Joshua's backpack close to the Sage Creek Wilderness area where his car had been found abandoned all those months ago. Sadly, just a day later on September 16th, park rangers found Joshua's body in a dry creek bed at the bottom of a ravine. His family were notified, and a positive identification was made by the coroner some days later. According to official reports, there was no signs of trauma, ruling out foul play, but the cause of his death remains unknown. The coroner has not commented whether the state of Joshua's body factored in the inability to uncover his cause of death, or whether there were other factors that prevented them from determining or disclosing the cause of death. Joshua's girlfriend, Darla Darnell, told KLKN-TV, "I do really miss him, quite a bit, and I still love him, and I always will. They found him on his mother's birthday, so it's been very difficult, and I know how I feel, but I can't imagine how it's affecting them." Joshua, rest in peace. Number 8. Mark Young Jr. 21-year-old Mark Young Jr. was just beginning to flourish into adulthood. He was studying political science at the University of Northern Colorado, and by all accounts was a normal student. His father, Mark Young Sr., told the Montrose Press he was always, in recent years, very disturbed about the whole global situation and problems. Lately, he was concerned about water for third world countries, and he just seemed to carry this huge burden on his shoulders about these global issues that just really troubled him. He let these big issues get to him that no one has the ability to change, but he seemed to think he was going to change things. Mark was dedicated to world issues and politics, so when he failed to turn up to his constitutional history class on September 16, 2008, one of his classmates and his roommate began the search for him. The two searched in and around Greeley, looking for any sign of Mark, but when their search failed, they knew they needed to contact Mark Sr. to let him know that his son was missing. Mark Sr. is a Civil Air Patrol pilot and a member of the Montrose County Sheriff's Posse, so he used those connections to kickstart the search for his son. Within hours of Mark being made aware that his son was missing, he had contacted Mark Jr.'s phone provider, AT&T, to obtain his call records. According to a Montrose Press article written in September of 2008, Mark Jr. made a voicemail check in the Bailey area on September 16th, the day that he disappeared. This quickly led Mark Sr. and the search party to Bailey, but there was one problem. AT&T later told Mark Sr. that after the voicemail check had been made, Mark Jr. sent a text message from the Montrose County area, which led the search party back there. Mark Sr. later told the Montrose Press, "What they failed to tell me, there was also a text message that was sent later in the day from Flat Top Tower." AT&T admitted a text message had been sent. That completely changed the search area. Originally, they didn't bother to tell me about the text message. Mark Jr.'s friends were incredibly cooperative in the search for him, and a friend told Mark Sr. that he had received the message. The contents of this message, though, have never been disclosed. Mark Sr. and the search crew continued through the night and into the next few days, searching every corner of Montrose County, hoping to find Mark Jr. By September 18th, the crew had turned their attention to the Black Canyon of Gunnison National Park, and it's not known whether their search naturally progressed there or whether the crew received a tip to search the park. Shortly into their search, Mark Sr. found his son's truck at the Chasm View Overlook on the south rim of the park. A ticket confirmed that Mark Jr. had entered the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park at around 5 p.m. on Tuesday, September 16, 2008. There was no indication made as to why Mark Jr. may have entered the park. With the discovery of his son's car, though, Mark Sr. knew that he was getting closer to finding his son. His mind raced with hundreds of thoughts, and he hoped and prayed that he would find Mark Jr. safe and well. Unfortunately, just 6 hours after Mark's truck was discovered, his body was found below a rim in the Chasm View area. As night had almost fallen, the recovery effort was postponed until the following day, September 19th, when Park Ranger Angie Richmond hiked to the rim and recovered Mark Jr.'s body with the assistance of a helicopter. The National Park Service made a press release on September 18, 2008 in regards to the discovery of Mark Jr.'s body, and in their release they noted Chasm View is a popular overlook along the scenic drive on the south rim of Black Canyon. The overlook is 1,820 feet above the Gunnison River and looks across the narrowest part of the canyon. Mark Jr.'s body was removed and transported to the Montrose County Coroner's Office, where Dr. Thomas Canfield performed an autopsy and determined that the remains did indeed belong to Mark Jr. Unfortunately, Mark's cause of death has either never been determined or never been released to the public, and what happened to him remains a mystery. There are very few articles about Mark Jr.'s disappearance, and those articles that do exist are from 2008. Mark Sr. later went on to thank the efforts of everyone involved in the search for his son and told the Montrose Press, "You're not supposed to have to bury your child. We're all doing the best we can do." Mark Jr., rest in peace, friend. Number 7, Nancy Wilcox. Now, Ted Bundy is a man who needs no introduction in this community, and his crimes could warrant a full video of their own. Well, everyone knows Ted's name and recognizes him for his disgusting charm and decision to represent himself in court. Nobody knows the names of his victims. For far too long, the names and lives of the young women whose lives he stole have been forgotten and buried underneath the plethora of sensationalism around Bundy himself. It's almost a cult of personality. It's time that we remember the women whose lives were taken, and that is why we're bringing you the story of 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox. Nancy was your typical 16-year-old girl. She lived in Holiday, Utah with her family and picked up a job at an Arctic Circle drive-in as a waitress when she wasn't attending Olympus High School. Nancy was a cheerleader and was popular amongst her friends, and in the months before she disappeared, she told her cousin something that would chill investigators years later. Her cousin, Jamie Hayden, later told investigators that Nancy confided in her that an older man who was attending law school had been visiting Nancy's work. It appears that the two had likely struck up a conversation a few times, and Susie, Nancy's sister, would also disclose that on a few occasions this unknown man had driven past their house. One article about Nancy's disappearance has suggested that this mysterious man may have been indeed Ted Bundy. At the time of Nancy's disappearance in October of 1974, Bundy was living in Salt Lake City, where he was attending the University of Utah School of Law. We all know that Bundy loved young brunette women, and with her thick, dark hair, Nancy would have certainly stood out to him. Left her home at 2409 Arnett Drive for what would be the last time. According to multiple sources, Nancy headed to school, and a little later on in the day, she left school to go and purchase some chewing gum. Nancy left the safe grounds of Olympus High School was last seen by her fellow students in the passenger seat of a yellow Volkswagen Bug. This was the last time that 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox was ever seen, and it would take the Holiday Police Department, now the Unified Police Department, several months to even begin the search for her. When she failed to return home from school, her parents did contact the police. However, both parties agreed that perhaps the young girl had likely run away. Nancy's sister, Susie, would later tell YouTuber Captain Borax that on the day of her disappearance, Nancy had gotten into an argument with her dad and had left the house. With this in mind, and this being the 1970s, Nancy was ruled a runaway, and very few efforts were made to find her in those initial hours and even days following her disappearance. In fact, it wasn't until December 1974 that the police even made Nancy's disappearance public and began to take her case seriously. This only came after another young woman disappeared and several more had been found murdered. It is unacceptable that it took the disappearance and murder of several more young women for any of their cases to be taken seriously, and it's likely that vital evidence in all the cases was lost due to the inaction of investigators. As the days and weeks passed without word from their daughter, the Wilcox began to worry that something terrible had happened to her. Weeks quickly turned into months, which slowly turned into years, and the Wilcox had no news of their daughter's disappearance. Her friends and family spoke with investigators, but despite this, nobody could find anything to suggest where she may have gone, why she may have left, or what could have happened to her. For the Wilcox family, the next 15 years would be filled with agony and sorrow, wondering if their beloved daughter had started a new life somewhere else or whether the unthinkable might have happened to her. Of course, her siblings never forgot about her, and her sister, Susie, has been her biggest advocate. The Wilcox waited and waited, hoping for some news from the local police department, and then in 1989, a new lead would come from the unlikeliest of sources. Ted Bundy had been found guilty and was sentenced and was awaiting his fate, and as he paced up and down his death row cell, he began to go through his list of victims and decided that it was time to tell the truth. Bundy confessed to having been responsible for Nancy's disappearance and told prison officials that he had buried her body somewhere in or near the Capitol Reef National Park. Maintaining the last shred of control he had over his victims, Bundy claimed that he wasn't sure of the exact spot. While Nancy's family felt like they finally had some answers, they now had to find her body and find out whether Bundy was telling the truth. Unfortunately, Nancy's remains have never been found, and Bundy's confession and the eyewitness accounts of Nancy in the yellow Volkswagen are the only pieces of evidence to connect her to this case. There was one possible sighting of Nancy that puts her in Lake Point, Utah. A waitress came forward after her disappearance was made public, telling investigators that she had seen Nancy in the company of a man with a mustache and that the two had left in a light-colored Volkswagen. Now, it's never been confirmed whether this sighting was of Nancy, and if it was, we don't know for sure that the man with her was Bundy. If Nancy's disappearance had been made public in the days after she disappeared, this clue may have led them to Nancy, and her family would finally have some answers. The Capitol Reef National Park is over 200 miles away from where Nancy lived in Utah, and Bundy claimed before his passing that Nancy had never been in his car. Bundy gave multiple different accounts of what happened, though, sometimes speaking in third person in order to distance himself from his crimes. If Nancy had never gotten in Bundy's car, how'd she gotten over 200 miles away to the Capitol Reef National Park? Bundy's accounts wildly differ, and it seems that Bundy himself was incapable of getting his own story straight. As it stands today, Nancy Wilcox is still missing, and her sister, Susie, continues to fight for justice on her behalf. It's believed that Bundy knew where Nancy was buried, but wanted to exercise, like we said, that last shred of control he had over her by keeping her final resting place a secret that only he knew. Nancy Wilcox would be 63 today, if still alive. She's described as a white female with brownish blonde hair, brown eyes, stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighing 120 pounds. She was last seen wearing a new coat, a size 9 dress, size 6.5 shoes. If you have any information about Nancy's disappearance, you're asked to contact the Unified Police Department of Greater Salt Lake City at 385-468-9800 and reference case number 74-54455. Number 4, Robert Stewart Pluta, and Robert Neal Pluta. 57-year-old Robert Stewart Pluta and 21-year-old Robert Neal Pluta had a close father-son relationship. Robert Sr. and Jr. loved nothing more than hiking and traveling through the great outdoors. So over Father's Day weekend in 2017, the pair decided to head to the Carlsbad Caverns National Park in New Mexico. The two planned to get a hotel and hike around the park, spending valuable time bonding together. Unfortunately, this would be the last trip they would ever take, and just weeks later, their families' lives would be turned upside down. Over the weekend of the 10th in June of 2017, Robert Sr. and Jr. left their homes in Corpus Christi, Texas, and headed for the park. It's unknown exactly which day the two left, and we know that the two headed into the park sometime that weekend. While the Father's Day celebration continued, Lillian, the wife and mother of the two Roberts, respectively, wondered what they were getting up to and what photographs they would have to show her when they returned. The days went by, and Lillian excitedly counted down the days. But on June 14, 2017, she received a troubling phone call. Robert Sr. and Robert Jr. had booked a room at the Fairfield Inn to give them a base camp during their hikes. When Lillian answered the phone, she was met by the reception desk of the Fairfield Inn, telling her that her husband and son had failed to check out. This was when Lillian knew something was deeply wrong, and she contacted authorities. Bank records were searched, and the last transaction was made at around 12 p.m. that day, according to the Carlsbad Current-Argus, and calls to their cell phone over the next few days went straight to voicemail. Lillian and the rest of the family desperately tried to get in contact with the two Roberts, hoping that one of them would answer. Lillian had alerted the authorities to the two men's disappearance, and within hours, a search and rescue team had assembled and was on the lookout for the pair. With temperatures rising in the park, time was against them. On June 19th, searchers, investigators, and officers entered the park once more, looking for any sign of the men. After a short search, they found the red Ford F-150 truck that the two had been traveling in, abandoned near the Rattlesnake Canyon trailhead. There was no evidence in the car to indicate where the two men had gone or what could have happened, but the discovery of the vehicle did help to expand the search radius. In total, the New Mexico State Police, the National Park Service, New Mexico State Search and Rescue, Mesilla Valley Search and Rescue, Oregon Mountain Technical Rescue, the Eddy County Fire Service, the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Native Air Ambulance all turned up to help find Robert Sr. and Jr. Unfortunately, shortly after their car was discovered, Robert Jr.'s body would be found at around 10 p.m., bringing the effort to a screeching halt. His body was discovered just 2 miles northwest of the caverns. It wouldn't be until the next morning at around 10 a.m. that Robert Sr.'s body would be discovered just a mile away from where his son was found. Their families were sadly informed, and the news devastated them understandably. Robert Sr. and Jr. were avid hikers, and their families found it hard to imagine how the two had encountered trouble out in the park. The bodies were transported to the coroner's office, who identified the two men, and later declared that the two had died due to heat exposure. Venus Singe, the coroner in charge of the autopsies, wrote in their report, quote, "No naturally occurring water sources in the area could have provided relief, and both hydration packs carried by the men were empty." End quote. Singe relayed that hydration packs, water, and SPF are vital when being outdoors in temperatures that were in the range they were that day. An exact date of death has never been publicized, and Singe commented that it could have taken them days to perish. The investigation is now officially closed, and their families are now left wondering how two avid hikers found themselves in this perilous situation. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the family. Darren Dixon. 20-year-old Darren Dixon of Muncie, Indiana, was a bright and promising young man with a great future ahead of him. After graduating from Burris High School, Darren enrolled at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, and was looking ahead to the future. When he wasn't studying hard towards his degree, Darren worked in the Yellowstone National Park in Montana as a busboy at the Roosevelt Lodge. Darren usually worked here during the long summer breaks, and the job gave him extra cash to see him through college. By 1993, Darren was in his second year of employment at the lodge and showed no signs of trouble or dislike of his job. But that all changed on July 2nd, 1993, when without warning, Darren quit his job. His employer and his colleagues were stunned. Darren had always been a good worker and gave no reason as to why he was quitting. He handed in his uniform, and that was the last time that anyone at the Roosevelt Lodge would ever see him. July 4th, 1993, American Independence Day, will be the last time that Darren was ever seen. According to the Charlie Project, Darren was seen in the Yellowstone National Park in Montana. No further details about his disappearance are available. When he failed to make contact with friends and family, the authorities were alerted and the search for the 20-year-old began. The only evidence found was Darren's car, which was located at the Lamar River Canyon pullout in the Yellowstone National Park, along with his wallet and other items that were found inside the car. Search and rescue crews, along with investigators, scoured Yellowstone National Park, but even now, almost 30 years later, there's been no sign of Darren. Did Darren meet with foul play? Did he have an accident, or is there something darker going on in the national park? Darren Dixon was last seen on July 4th, 1993, in the Yellowstone National Park. He's described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, stood 6 foot 1 inches tall, and weighed 170 pounds. Darren has a tooth mark scar on his head and a 1-inch scar on his knee. He was last seen wearing a white long-sleeve t-shirt with blue jeans and hiking boots. Anyone with information is asked to please contact the Yellowstone National Park Service at 307-344-2640 or the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation at 307-777-7181. Next, we have Dennis Eugene Johnson. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where there are very few details available. Dennis Eugene Johnson, little 8-year-old boy, very typical. He loved to be in the great outdoors, and his father had made sure to teach Dennis basic yet vital survival skills. The Johnsons lived in Inyokern, California, and in early April 1966, the family packed their suitcases and went on vacation to the Yellowstone National Park in the Wyoming side. Dennis was thrilled about the upcoming trip, and he daydreamed about all the open spaces that he could explore. Sadly, what should have been a wonderful experience for the little boy quickly morphed into a tragedy. On April 12, 1966, the Johnsons were on a hike and had stopped for a quick rest at the Cascade picnic area. As the parents' backs were turned, but for a moment, Dennis' 7-year-old sister Mary had disappeared somewhere in the wilderness. Knowing she couldn't have gone far, Dennis and his father agreed to split up and search for her. Some sources even mentioned that Dennis was the one to sound the alarm that his sister was missing, showing his caring and attentive nature. Dennis knew basic survival skills and how to navigate in the great outdoors, so his father wasn't too worried about his son. As the Johnsons walked through the trees, shouting their daughter's name, they quickly came across her and headed back to the spot where they were taking a break previously. The only problem was, now Dennis was missing. Once again, the Johnsons were back to shouting, this time looking for their son. They searched high and low, calling out Dennis' name, but he was simply gone. Seconds felt like hours for the Johnsons as they desperately searched for their son, and after some time had elapsed, they knew that something was very, very wrong and immediately summoned a park ranger. Soon, 50 people, including volunteers and search and rescue units, had flooded into the picnic area, trying to find any sign of Dennis. For 2 weeks, the Johnsons and volunteers combed the picnic area, and eventually their search had expanded to cover over 12 miles. Despite this Herculean effort for the community and authorities, no sign of little Dennis Johnson was ever found. There were no footprints, no clothes, nothing to suggest what might have happened to him. The Charlie Project interestingly notes that Dennis may have gotten lost and perished due to low temperatures and lack of food and water, but it's also possible that he was kidnapped. With no evidence to point either way, all we can do is speculate. The 56th anniversary of Dennis' disappearance has just passed, and his family are still no closer to finding out what happened to their little son. Dennis Johnson was last seen at around 1:30 p.m. in the Cascade picnic area of the Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. He was described as a white male child with sandy blonde hair, brown eyes, and would be 64 years old if still alive today. He has a 6-inch scar on his abdomen that runs through his navel. Was last seen wearing a dark red or magenta long-sleeve shirt, tan Levi's pants, and size 8 laced moccasin-style hiking boots with crepe soles. Anyone with any information is asked to contact Daniel Kirshner of the National Park Service at 307-344-2122. Next, Timothy Joseph Lynch. In June 2003, 44-year-old Timothy Joseph Lynch booked himself a well-earned holiday to Hawaii. The vacation will make a nice change of scenery from Newburgh, Indiana, and Timothy wanted to visit the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park to take in the beautiful surroundings and take some photos. As Timothy's vacation drew to a close, other passengers shuffled into the gate, scanning their boarding passes and preparing to fly back home. But Timothy was nowhere to be seen. His estranged wife, Tamara Lynch, had learned that Timothy had failed to show up at Bueller's Bilo that he managed and knew that something was wrong. After learning this, Tamara reported her estranged husband missing and went to his house in Newburgh to look for any sign of him. As she entered the home they once shared, she saw that the answering machine was beeping, with bright lights alerting to unread messages. As she picked up the phone and dialed the code to the answering machine, she was shocked to hear a message from the hotel, the Royal Kona Resort, where he had been staying. In the voicemail, the reception of the hotel asked Timothy when he was going to check out and when he was going to pay the bill. This message sent alarm bells ringing for Tamara and the authorities, who quickly contacted the Hawaii County Police Department to notify them of the situation. Investigators began checking into the details of Timothy's holiday and found that he had last been seen on June 6, 2003, at the end of Chain of Craters Road in the Hawaii National Park. Witnesses saw him hiking and taking photos, and after this, there were no more sightings. Investigators were baffled, and they began searching the park by foot and air. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, no sign of Timothy has ever been found. Timothy left everything behind in his room at the Royal Kona Resort. All signs pointed to Timothy still being in Hawaii, so where was he and what happened to him? During his trip, Timothy had rented a car, which was later found in the Hawaii Volcanoes parking lot, and again, the rental car yielded no clues. A year after his disappearance, his estranged wife, Tamara, petitioned the court to have Timothy declared legally deceased, although his family were not on board with this proceeding. In 2004, the Star-Bulletin reported that Robert Lynch, Timothy's father, had his own theories and suspicions about what happened to his son. As reported by the Star-Bulletin, which is now available online thanks to archives, Robert Lynch said he thinks their son either planned his own disappearance because of his dirty divorce, or he met with foul play by someone who stole his identity and then traveled to Hawaii to fake his death. Robert told the Star-Bulletin, quote, "It seems odd to me, and also to just about everybody else, that he would take his ticket and his travel orders with him from the hotel on a side trip. Every day, we pray for some wisdom to find Tim, to know where he is, how he is, what he is. If we knew he passed on, it would be a relief. But every day we live with this, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week." End quote. Timothy Lynch is described as a white male with brown hair and brown eyes, standing 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighing 180 pounds. Timothy is listed as having a dark complexion and a muscular build. He has a surgical scar on his abdomen and a light brown abrasion scar on his lower back. He was last seen wearing gray and silver hiking shoes and carrying a black shoulder bag. Timothy may have also styled his facial hair in a goatee. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Warwick County Sheriff's Department in Indiana at 812-897-6180 and reference case 03-1531, or the Hawaii County Police Department at 808-935-3311. Number 2, John Paul Squires. 71-year-old John Paul Squires was last seen rafting on American Creek in the Katmai National Park in Alaska on June 20th, 2018. There are very few reports about John's disappearance, but we do know that on the day of his disappearance, John was out rafting with 2 friends and that the 3 of them had traveled from their home in California to Alaska. Each year, the 3 friends would make the journey through the U.S.-Canada border and back into Alaska for their annual fishing trip. It was a trip the 3 men looked forward to, giving them a peaceful escape away from their hectic lives, and it was a good chance for the friends to catch up with each other. The National Park Service reported in their press release about John's disappearance that Squires was last seen rafting the American Creek in Katmai National Park, Alaska, when the raft he was in hit a sweeper, throwing him and the other occupants on board into the fast-flowing creek. He was last seen swimming downriver, attempting to reach the shoreline. At the time of the friends' annual trip, the waters had been especially high and rocky, but they decided to go rafting anyway. Unfortunately, and for reasons unknown, John was not wearing a life jacket, and the fast current of the water swept him away from his friends, and sadly all they could do was watch on as he attempted to swim to safety. Luckily, his two friends made it to shore and were later assisted, but John has never been seen or heard from since. Authorities believe that John drowned. However, his family and friends are desperate for solid answers as to what happened to their loved one. John Paul Squires is described as a white male with brown hair, blue eyes, standing 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighing 195 pounds. John may have been sporting a gray mustache and also has a tattoo on his left forearm of a wilderness scene with a river, mountains, and a flying raven. He was last seen wearing a brown down vest, gray Patagonia waders, and river sandals. Anyone with any information is asked to contact Melia Miller of the Alaska State Troopers at 907-269-5511 and reference case AK 180-42012. And finally, Christopher Vigil. 9-year-old Christopher Vigil wasn't your average 9-year-old, according to the Missing Christopher Vigil website. Chris, as he was known, was an incredibly curious bookworm who wanted to know everything about the world and how it worked. He was incredibly intelligent and always got straight A's in the school he attended in LaPorte, Colorado. The website was created by a childhood friend of Chris, who also obtained case files from investigators, though not all of these pages were released, as they were only given 54 out of the 95 pages of information. Now, while Chris was incredibly intelligent, both academically and emotionally, he was also just like any other kid his age, loved Diet Pepsi and junk food, and would often be seen sharing his food and drink and sometimes even money with others. So it's safe to say that Chris had an extremely big heart and had time for everyone. At just 9 years old, he radiated kindness and curiosity, two things that the world needs at all times. There's no doubt that Chris was special and that he was going to go far in life, but before his potential could ever be realized, it was cruelly taken away from him. Now, over 44 years later, we're left asking, where is Christopher Vigil? On April 30th, 1978, Chris, his mom, and his younger brother were out hiking on Gray Mountain Rock Trail in the Padre Canyon in Padre Park, an area they had never hiked before. Chris' little brother, Eric, was a toddler at the time of the disappearance, so his mother, Marion, had to spend most of her time and energy tending to the little one and helping him along the trail. This slowed him even more concerned as the darkness brought chilly temperatures with it. When he had left his mother to go ahead, Chris was only wearing a green shirt, pants, and a maroon denim jacket, clothes that were not suitable for the outdoors, especially at nighttime temperatures. Throughout the night, the search parties pressed on, and even some of the volunteers got hypothermia as they had severely underestimated how cold it was going to get in the park. Snow and fog rolled in with the morning sun, which did little to help the search efforts. Helicopter pilots furiously studied weather charts, hoping to see that the fog would be clearing soon and that they could continue the search. The adverse weather hampered the search efforts, but the incredible volunteers and authorities pressed on to the best of their ability, determined to find little Chris before it was too late. The days pressed on, and search parties signed in and out, trudging through every inch of the park. While these search efforts continued in the park, investigators made public appeals and released information about Chris and his disappearance, and it wasn't long until some very troubling clues filtered into the police. Alan Chupin came forward to investigators, telling them that he had seen Chris on the trail that day. When Chris had run ahead of his mother, the two had encountered each other on the trail. This account is, of course, from Alan, and while there is no evidence to connect him to the case, it is important to take these witness accounts with a pinch of salt. Alan wasn't the only person to see Chris that day, apparently, around his neck, and they found it odd that he was sitting so close to Chris. The two women carried on further up the trail and found a spot to sit and eat their lunch. Just as they were taking their first bite, they heard two people shouting. One sounded like a young boy, and the other an older man. The shouting carried on for a few minutes, but Rebecca and Carol did not investigate as they were worried for their own safety. Two women added that they had wanted to investigate but were too scared. Minutes later, the shouting had subsided, and the two breathed a sigh of relief. They continued on eating before packing up their leftovers in boxes and preparing to carry on with the rest of the trail. It wasn't until they walked past the same rock that they had seen the strange man on that they realized that something was amiss. On the ground, they saw a can of Diet Pepsi and remembered that Chris had been carrying a can when they saw him earlier. Diet Pepsi was also his favorite drink. All these details were relayed to investigators, Now the picture was becoming a little more clear, perhaps. But who was this mysterious man? Unfortunately, no forensic evidence was obtained from the can, as one of the women picked it up to discard later. Police began combing through the women's stories and were certain that the mysterious man they heard Chris arguing with was not Alan Chupin. Alan also stated to investigators that the man heard with Chris was not him. Alan also had blonde hair, while this mysterious man had dark hair. With so many questions but very few answers, investigators continued through the park, but to no avail. After just 6 days, the search for Chris was officially called off due to adverse weather conditions. Chris' family and those closest to him were understandably devastated, but vowed to never give up looking for the little boy. Carol and Rebecca would later tell investigators that they remembered seeing a white Volvo station wagon and a light green car in the parking lot of the Grey Rock Mountain Trail that day, but they were unable to recall any license plate numbers or any other distinguishing factors. Even professional scent dogs were not able to find any trace of Chris, leading most to believe that he was likely kidnapped by the mysterious man at the rocks that day. Alan Chupin was ruled out by investigators, which means that another man must have been stalking the trails that day. Was this a crime of opportunity? Did the man set out that day hoping to come across a young boy on the trail, and Chris just so happened to be the unsuspecting victim? Or did Chris wander off into the great unknown, wearing nothing but a green shirt and a denim jacket? There have been numerous apparent sightings of Chris in Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. All of these sightings have never been confirmed. So for now, Chris' disappearance remains unsolved, and his remaining family members and friends are the driving force behind keeping his name in the media and keeping his case alive. Christopher William Vigil was last seen on April 14, 1978, on the Grey Rock Mountain Trail in Padre Park, Colorado. He is described as a white male with brown hair, green eyes, stood 4 foot 8 inches tall, and weighed 74 pounds. He was last seen wearing a dark green knit shirt, green plaid pants, white socks, blue tennis shoes, and a maroon or purple denim jacket. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact John Fan of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office at 970-498-7000. Number 10. Ronan Lawler. In the months before his disappearance, 28-year-old Ronan Lawler had quit his job in Ballina, County Mayo, Ireland, and had poured all of his money and resources into traveling. After graduating from University College in Dublin and getting himself an engineering job, Ronan discovered that he wanted more from life and had begun to make plans to backpack around South America. Now, it's common in the UK and Ireland for young people to backpack around South America and other places, and you'll find numerous blogs, YouTube channels, and Instagram pages of young people who are doing just the same as Ronan did. The only difference is that these young people make it home. Ronan had planned to backpack for around 8 months, and by November 18, 2007, he had made it to Argentina. According to the Irish Times newspaper, Ronan entered the Torres del Paine National Park situated on the Argentine-Chilean border on November 18th, and sadly, this was the last time he was ever heard from. According to the Irish Times, Ronan kept a travel blog, and those who knew him kept up with his posts, eagerly awaiting the next set of photos and stories from his trip. The last entry was made on November 17, 2007, and the last communication from Ronan came on November 18th when he sent a text to his friend Bernard McCabe. After that, Ronan vanished into thin air and failed to make contact with his friends or family. His family noted straight away that this was extremely out of character for Ronan, as he called and messaged his family at least once a week during his trip. Their suspicions were confirmed when Ronan failed to show up for his flight to Buenos Aires on November 25, 2007. After this, Ronan was reported missing and the search and rescue effort began. Helicopters from the Chilean Army, scent dogs, and searchers on the ground combed through the park looking for any sign of Ronan. However, as the days passed, there was no sign of Ronan to be found. His family, understandably devastated, flew out to Argentina from Ireland to help in the search effort for Ronan, and in mid-December 2007, another break in the case came. As reported by the Irish Times, Ronan's backpack was found at a hostel in El Calafate, Argentina, around 159 miles away from the national park, per Google. Ronan was entering the park at the border of Chile and Argentina, so the distance may be closer. However, the two places are still significantly far apart, no matter where Ronan entered the park. The contents of his backpack have not been released, but his family hoped and prayed that this was a positive sign. Christmas 2007 came and went, and the Lawler family ushered in the new year without their beloved Ronan. Then, just a few days after the New Year's celebrations had died down, a horrific discovery was made. Two Brazilian mountaineers, making their way through the park, discovered Ronan's body in a crevice and reported this to the police. The Chilean authorities responded immediately and were flooded with questions as to whether this was the body of missing hiker Ronan Lawler. By the end of January, the Chilean authorities had indeed confirmed that the body discovered in the crevice was that of 28-year-old Ronan Lawler, and that his family had been made aware of its discovery. According to a report by The Independent, in January 2008, it is believed that he had fallen after losing his footing while hiking on his own. Ronan's body was recovered and transported back to Ireland so that his family could give him a proper burial and a full service. The news rocked the people in County Mayo and the area where Ronan had grown up. Ronan was described as an intelligent young man with a whole world ahead of him. His father told The Independent that it was a joyous day when they learned that their son had been found and that they finally had closure. He went on to say, "The discovery of Ronan's body has been a blessing to us. The day the news of the discovery came through was a joyous day for all of us. Up until this, we had been resigned to the fact that Ronan might never be found. This would have made it very difficult to bring about any sense of closure for us. Now we have finality, and after many very difficult months, it's just nice to have him home at last. Rest in peace, Ronan, and prayers to the family." Number 9. Jong Young Won. There are very few details in the case of Jong Young Won, and one Redditor believes that they may have discovered a vital clue in his disappearance. According to the National Park Service, Jong Young's white Toyota Camry was found on the south rim of the Grand Canyon National Park on September 17, 2017. The car had been abandoned, and there was no sign of Jong Young. This discovery puzzled investigators, who decided to dig a little deeper, and they found that, according to his friends and family, Jong Young had no plans to be in the Grand Canyon National Park at all. Investigators also found that his car had been seen near the New Hants trailhead, but nobody could confirm if Jong Young was in or around the car. Jong Young has not been seen or heard from since, and the authorities are concerned for his welfare. There are very few articles online documenting his disappearance, but one post to the r/Unsolved Mysteries subreddit caught our eye. A user by the name of u/Maya_Minamito wrote a post about Jong Young's case in 2020. They added the following update to their post that reads, "Update. Found Jong Young Won's second Facebook page in Korean, and his first name isn't Jong Young anymore, it's Daniel now. He also has more friends. Well, there are 5. Should I send them a message? What do you think? Maybe they are from the same family." No further updates were added to this post, but this does bring about the question of whether Jong Young wanted to disappear, or whether this is merely just a coincidence, someone with the same name. Jong Young Won is described as an Asian male with black hair, brown eyes, stands 5 foot 7 inches tall, and weighs 121 pounds. His car was found abandoned in the Grand Canyon National Park, and authorities are concerned for his welfare. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the National Park Service at 888-653-0009. Number 8. Adam Clayton Lyle Jones. 23-year-old Adam Clayton Lyle Jones was last seen on March 31, 2011, in Gulf Breeze, Florida, by his family, who had no idea what was about to unfold in front of them. Armed with only his laptop and his debit card, Adam jumped into his light blue Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a dark blue vinyl top and no hubcaps and headed out west. His family thought he was going for a simple road trip, but a discovery a few days later would change all of that. His family had no idea that Adam was even missing or in danger. He didn't own a cell phone and had appeared fine when he set off west from Gulf Breeze, Florida. It wasn't until the family received a call on May 5, 2011, that they realized the gravity of the situation. The call was from a park ranger, informing them that Adam's car had been found, abandoned, at the South Rim Visitor Center in the Grand Canyon National Park, over 1,690 miles away from his home. Following this discovery, Adam was reported missing, and a wide-scale search began. Bank records showed that in the days before his disappearance, Adam had used his debit card in Louisiana and Texas. Inside his abandoned car, they also found an itinerary that would have taken him through California and Denver, Colorado. The itinerary provided no further clues and does not appear as though Adam's card has been used since his disappearance. Authorities have not shared any other details about Adam's car, and we don't know what happened to the laptop. Unfortunately, there are very few details to work with, which is both frustrating and heartbreaking. His family members shared several posts on Facebook asking for anyone with information to please come forward. However, over 10 years later, we're still searching for the truth. Adam Clayton Lyle Jones is described as a white male with brown hair and blue eyes, stands 5 foot 8 inches tall, and weighs 145 pounds. He was last seen driving a light blue Oldsmobile Delta 88 with Florida license plates, no hubcaps, with a dark blue vinyl top. This car was later located in the Grand Canyon National Park. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office at 850-983-1162 or the Grand Canyon National Park Service at 928-638-7805. Number 7, Armin B. Johnson. 44-year-old Armin B. Johnson always tried to do good for others. He worked as a therapeutic aide for children with autism, and in his spare time, he volunteered at the local high school, which was in Hilo, Hawaii. He coached kids through their physical education lessons and activities. He was well regarded in the community, known as a kind and thoughtful man who would offer out the branch of help to anyone who needed it. While he wasn't native to Hawaii, he had quickly been accepted by the local community and had fit in well following his move from Seattle. When not helping out the local community and his children, Armin also hosted a reggae radio show and was also a big figure in local ministries. By all accounts, Armin was a kind and loving man who had a big heart and a man who was very well known in his community of Hilo. He had a magnetic personality, was charming, and seemed to put everyone who met him at ease. Unfortunately, things for Armin would take a tragic turn in April 2005, and ever since then, the Hawaiian authorities and the FBI have been on the hunt for the person responsible. On April 13, 2005, a passerby found Armin's body near mile marker 71 on Mamalahoa Highway on the southern edge of the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Wearing only a tank top, swimming shorts, socks, and slippers, Armin had been shot where he stood, once in the back of his neck before his attacker fled. There is no mention of what evidence, if any, was obtained from the scene and whether this has ever been processed for DNA. There are lots of unknowns in Armin's case, and now, over 17 years later, the FBI are still desperately trying to track down the person responsible. The news of Armin's passing shocked the community. He was well loved for his kind and gentle nature, and everyone struggled to think who would want to do such a thing to him. Unfortunately, there is little information available about the case, aside from the facts that have already been presented here. As we said, Armin was a well-liked man in the community, and his passing has shocked community members and the FBI. A friend of Armin's, Bill Stormont, said, "He talked in a loud voice. You could hear him across the room. He wasn't aggressive, though. To put it bluntly, he couldn't fight his way out of a paper sack." There's currently a $10,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in Armin's case, and anyone with any information is asked to please contact the FBI's Honolulu branch office at 808-566-4300. Armin, rest in peace, and I hope justice is served. Number 6, Kieran Burke. 44-year-old Irish citizen Kieran Burke was last seen on April 5, 2000, in the Yosemite Valley in Curry Village in the Yosemite National Park. Kieran had spent his life in County Dublin, Ireland, where he was surrounded by stunning scenery and large open spaces. As a result, Kieran became an expert hiker and outdoorsman, and in 2000, he decided to take the trip of a lifetime to San Francisco, California. According to reports, Kieran planned on spending 2 weeks in the U.S. before returning home to share his adventures with his family. Kieran boarded the plane from Dublin to California with his family waving him off as he went, not knowing that this would be the last time that they would see him. Within a matter of weeks, however, they too would be boarding a plane to America to help search and rescue teams find him. On April 11, 2000, the Yosemite National Park staff contacted authorities to let them know that Kieran had not checked out of the park on April 6th, as he had stated in his plans. After this report came in, authorities went to the campsite and found that Kieran's tent was still in place with everything inside. This immediately struck investigators as odd, and they began their search for him. During their initial investigation, they spoke to witnesses who recalled seeing Kieran in the Yosemite Valley at Curry Village while he was on a day hike. This is the last confirmed sighting of Kieran, and after this, it seems as if he simply vanished. A wide-scale search of the park was conducted after Kieran was reported missing. However, these searches yielded no results. His family even flew over from Ireland to Yosemite National Park to aid in the searches. But now, over 22 years later, his disappearance remains a mystery. Kieran Burke is described as a white male with black hair, blue eyes, standing 6 feet tall and 180 pounds. He was last seen wearing a leather bomber jacket, and his rental car was discovered in the parking lot of Curry Village. Authorities also believe that he may have been carrying his camera at the time he went missing. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Yosemite National Park Service at 209-372-0361 and reference case number NP19008909. Numbers 5 and 4. Julianne Williams and Laura Winans. This next case is 2 entries rolled into one as we dive into the mystery of Julianne Williams and Laura Winans. These 2 bright young women, unfortunately, met their end in the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, and almost 26 years later, their cases remain unsolved. Julianne and Laura were from different worlds. Laura, who went by Lolly, had an affluent upbringing, but as she got older, she decided to reject the privilege she had around her in search of a more down-to-earth life. Julianne, who went by Julie, had a rather standard working-class upbringing, and to outsiders, it seemed unlikely that the worlds of these 2 women would collide. However, in 1994, the 2 crossed paths while working with the charity Woods Women, based in Minnesota, which helps women get into outdoor activities by providing them with the equipment and knowledge to do so. Both Lolly and Julie loved hiking, and they quickly bonded over their shared interest. The 2 quickly became a couple and appeared to be very happy and content together. Despite coming from 2 different worlds, the girls did share another thing in common aside from their love of the outdoors. They both liked to help others. Lolly liked to help others in the outdoors, while Julie also liked to help others in a different setting. When not out hiking, Julie would often devote her time to working with those less fortunate in the community, and the couple were liked by all who met them. On May 19, 1996, the couple set out on what would be their last trip. Julie had recently gotten herself a new job, and the 2 women wanted to spend the last of their free time together in the great outdoors. On May 19, 1996, Julie and Lolly packed their bags, gathered supplies, and most importantly, brought along another companion, Lolly's dog Taj. The 3 said their goodbyes and headed for the Shenandoah National Park. The 2 women told their parents that they would be home by May 28th, which gave Julie time to prepare for her new job. The 2 women entered the park on May 19, 1996, and unfortunately, that was the last time they were ever seen or heard from. By May 28, 1996, neither of the girls' parents had heard from them, which deeply concerned the parents. Both women were known to be responsible, and it was out of character for them not to have made contact. Thomas Williams, Julie's dad, knew that something wasn't quite right, and by May 31st, just a day before his daughter was set to start her new job, he reported the duo missing. Thomas hoped and prayed that the 2 women had simply lost track of time and would be found wandering in the park. However, what investigators would find next shocked the Williams and the Winans to their core. On June 1st, 1996, the day that Julie was due to start her new job that she was so excited about, investigators would make a horrific discovery. Just north of the Skyland Lodge near the Bridle Trail, the car and the bodies of Julie and Lolly were discovered. The area surrounding where the women were found had been busy over the weekend, but their bodies had remained undiscovered. Both women had suffered, being tied up before being undressed and attacked. The exact details of what Lolly and Julie went through are too graphic to share here, unfortunately, and are unimaginable, to say the least. The discovery quickly pivoted the investigation from missing persons to a murder inquiry. Their families were made aware of the discovery, and just like that, within a matter of moments, the lives of 2 families had been shattered. The Shenandoah National Park is under federal jurisdiction. The FBI, the National Park Service, and the Virginia State Police all worked together to help solve the case. No male DNA evidence was found at the crime scene, and the authorities quickly found themselves at a dead end with the case. That was until a person of interest, Daryl David Rice, entered the picture. Rice had been arrested for attacking and trying to abduct Canadian cyclist Yvonne Malbasha in the same park in 1997. The authorities quickly began to establish links between Rice and the crime against Lolly and Julie, and according to sources, Rice was known to be very anti-LGBTQ+, and it was theorized that this was perhaps his motive for killing the 2 women. After gathering evidence and testimony, Rice was taken to trial, but he was not charged. The prosecution failed to submit adequate forensic evidence that proved Rice was responsible, and he was able to dodge the double murder charge. Rice was found guilty of attempting to kidnap Canadian Yvonne Malbasha, for which he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. He had also been the subject of several other investigations for similar crimes, and has been outed as a woman hater and a homophobe. He regularly told others that women were more vulnerable than men, and that Julie and Lolly deserved what happened to them because they were gay. After the Julie and Lolly case was dismissed against Rice in 2004, the case has remained cold ever since. Although, while we might view the case as cold, the FBI certainly doesn't see it that way. Adam Lee, the special agent in charge of the FBI Richmond Division, told NBC Washington in June 2016, "This is a pending case, and I bristle at the term cold case. We will stop at nothing to find justice in the case, and until we have exhausted every means, we continue to this day to exploit the existing evidence and to try to obtain new evidence. Julie and Lolly are not forgotten in the Richmond Division of the FBI, and we're going to aggressively pursue every lead in this case." The parents of Lolly and Julie hold out hope that one day their daughters' cases will be solved. The 2 women were in a loving relationship, and both of them had bright, promising futures ahead. While the FBI and other authorities are looking down other avenues for answers, Thomas Williams, the father of Julie, believes that Rice is the one responsible. He spoke to NBC Washington in June 2016 and said, "I think that certainly, on the very remote possibility that it could be anybody else, we would look forward to having justice with Julie." Anyone with any information about the murders of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans is asked to please contact the FBI's Richmond office at 804-261-1044. Or you can contact the Shenandoah National Park Service at 540-999-3500. Julie and Lolly, rest in peace. Our hearts and prayers go out to the families. Number 3, Dan Campbell. Tracy Erb was excited to meet her boyfriend, 41-year-old Dan Campbell, in the Jardine area just outside of Yellowstone National Park on April 6, 1991. The 2 resided in Sweetgrass County, Montana, and were looking ahead to the future together. 2 days earlier, on April 4th, Dan had headed into the park with his trusty canine companion in search of elk antlers. The gathering and selling of elk antlers is illegal, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Yellowstone National Park is no stranger to those gathering elk antlers, and just because it's illegal doesn't mean people won't try to do it anyway. From reports, we know that Dan entered the Yellowstone National Park on April 4th, 1991, after being dropped off at the Hell Roaring Creek trailhead. This was the last time that Dan was ever seen or heard from, and as previously mentioned, when he failed to turn up and meet his girlfriend, the alarm was raised. On April 8th, 1991, Dan was officially reported missing, and the search and rescue effort for him commenced. According to sources, Dan left with minimal equipment as he did not plan on being in the park for long, and as the weather changed and thunderstorms rolled in, the concern for his safety and welfare rose. While he was an experienced outdoorsman and had extensive knowledge in pole cutting, without the proper equipment and clothing, Dan stood little chance against the elements. The search effort continued for Dan, although his family has commented that this search was lackluster and disappointing. During their search, authorities failed to uncover any sign of Dan or his Australian Shepherd dog, which led his family to believe that he had met with foul play. In the months after his disappearance, Dan's brother, Billy Campbell, told the Helena Independent Record he'd been running with some pretty shady characters. I'm not saying he's an angel, because he's not. His younger brother, Rod Campbell, further went on to tell the News, July of 1991, "If Dan's in the park, he's buried. I don't think Dan is alive." How that demise came, well, I've got a lot of mixed emotions about it. Authorities and his family denied rumors that Dan had run away to start a new life, stating that he was about to come into a large sum of money and he had plans to use that money and the money he made from selling elk antlers to move house. With few updates in Dan's case, his family quickly became frustrated with law enforcement, and in February 2000, they filed a federal lawsuit against the Park County Sheriff at the time, Charlie Johnson. According to news reports, the lawsuit stated that Sheriff Johnson breached his legal duty to properly and competently conduct the investigation relating to the disappearance of Dan Campbell. It was also during this time that Dan's family divulged more information about his disappearance. In an article for the Independent Record, Billy Campbell said, "From the evidence I've acquired down through the years, I believe my brother was murdered there. There were 14 people up there horn hunting in the area at that time. Another horn hunter up there heard 2 shots. Now, we will point out here that these claims have never been substantiated, but it is clear that Dan's family were not happy with the level of investigation that was conducted into his disappearance. As of this recording in 2022, no sign of Dan nor his dog has ever been found, and his case remains cold. Dan Campbell is described as a white male with brown hair and green eyes, stands 5 foot 7 inches tall, and weighs 130 pounds. Dan had a healed fracture to his left hand, a scar on his chin, a scar on his upper right arm, and a gap between his front teeth. Anyone with information is asked to please contact Sheriff Dan Tronrud of the Sweetgrass County Sheriff's Office at 406-932-5143 and mention case number 91-60. Or you can call Sheriff Scott Hamilton of the Park County Sheriff's Office at 406-222-2050. Number 2, David Paul Morrison. 28-year-old David Paul Morrison was last seen in the Little Yosemite Valley in the Yosemite National Park on May 25, 1998. According to reports, David had planned on hiking from Little Yosemite Valley to Half Dome, but when he never arrived, his friends and family grew concerned. Witnesses placed David in Little Yosemite Valley at around 7:15 a.m., and it's believed that he set off on his hike shortly thereafter. Sadly, not much is known about David or his life, and the only reminder of his existence is through missing persons posters and pages. The Charlie Project notes that although David was an experienced hiker, he wasn't carrying the necessary supplies to be gone overnight or for any extended period of time for that matter. This is the only information available about his disappearance, and the Yosemite National Park Service is appealing to anyone with any information to please come forward. David Paul Morrison was last seen on the morning of May 15, 1998, in Little Yosemite Valley in the Yosemite National Park. He is described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, standing 5 foot 9 inches tall and weighing 150 pounds. David had a birthmark on his right earlobe and a scar on the bridge of his nose. He was last seen wearing a gray, long-sleeved University of California jacket, a white t-shirt, black tracksuit bottoms or perhaps faded navy shorts, Nike Air trainers, and a black, green, and yellow fanny pack. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Yosemite National Park Service at 209-372-0361. And lastly, number 1, Tim Barnes. 24-year-old Timothy Tim Barnes was last seen on July 5, 1988, as he was leaving Tenaya Lakes near Highway 120, just off Tioga Road in California. Sources differ as to the location he was dropped off at. Some state that it was Tenaya Lakes, while others say he was driven to the Murphy Creek trailhead. Either way, early on the morning of July 5, 1988, Tim said goodbye to whoever had dropped him off with the intention of hiking from Murphy Creek to Polydome Lakes. This is a relatively short 3-mile hike with flat and forgiving terrain. It's the perfect trail for a quick hike and the perfect place for the budding outdoorsmen to cut their teeth, so to speak. Having set off early in the morning, it was anticipated that Tim would be back in time for dinner, but unfortunately, he never returned. His friends waited until the morning of July 6, 1988, the next day, to report him missing, in the hopes that their friend had simply gotten lost. As the morning came around and there was no sign of Tim, his friends called the Yosemite National Park Service to report the incident. A wide-scale search of the area was conducted, but there was no sign of Tim. Since that warm July day in 1988, no sign, no trace of Tim has ever been found, and his case is classified as cold. 2 years later, Tim was declared deceased in absentia. Tim Barnes is described as a white male with brown hair and brown eyes, stands 6'4" and weighs 180 pounds. According to the Charlie Project, Tim may have a mustache or a goatee. He has blue discoloration on his upper lip and a wart on the right side of his nose. His teeth appear grayish in color, and he has an orthopedic pin implanted in his left ankle. He was last seen wearing a white t-shirt with the letter F with a red circle on it with a slash through it, gray jogging pants, well-worn tennis shoes, sunglasses with brown frames, and was carrying a yellow day pack. At the time of his disappearance, Tim also smoked Marlboro cigarettes. So anyone who may have ran into him on the trail that day or has any information is asked to please contact the Yosemite National Park Police Department at 209-379-1992 and mention case 88-2119. Well, friends, there you have it. What do you think of these strange disappearances? I look forward to hearing your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. If you'd like to see more videos like this, check out the playlist that we have here on our channel. These playlists showcase our best content and videos that many of you may have never seen before. So check them out, see what you might have missed out. Till we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other. Stay safe out there. As for me, I'll see you a little further on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.